Here.
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 Thank you. We'll begin tonight's meeting with agenda-related public participation. Marilyn, do we have any agenda-related comments tonight?
No.
Okay, thank you. That concludes our agenda-related public comments for the evening. Before we begin our working session tonight, though, I wanted to share a few thoughts. On Friday, April 22nd, LT held an all-school assembly at North Campus. The energy and collective school spirit was unlike anything we've seen in the past 2 years. As adults, we sometimes forget the pride and pure joy that comes with being surrounded by students who share commonality in just being human, being young, and having their entire lives still ahead of them. That joy as they cheered on their friends and classmates and rooted for their favorite teachers during the dance-off was exciting, inspiring, and real. That moment reflects the true spirit and core of this community, of our students. This is who we are. This is LT. However, recent incidents have not reflected this, and there are no words that can take away or undo the harm that is caused when we treat each other with anything less than the respect that each person deserves. The feelings and actions of some people do not represent the feelings and actions of all. We know we can do better. The board, along with our administration, is currently in legal review of our student discipline policies and procedures and exploring creative ways we can connect with our students who have been out of the traditional rhythm of school culture for nearly 2 years. There is still a lot of work to do to bridge the gap from the pandemic, and we cannot do it alone. We need parents, community members, coaches, teachers, faith leaders, and everyone who interacts with our youth to lead by example. We know this journey won't be easy, but when we work together, not against each other, to dispute misinformation, disengage from harmful rhetoric, and contribute to positive and helpful conversations and opportunities, we are leading by example. We know this year was challenging and in some ways harder than the last two, but our teachers, our paras, our building crew, our staff, and especially our students continue to show up each and every day, each and every one of them determined to build back that camaraderie and connection that we lost. And we are grateful and so appreciative of you. As the school year comes to close, we have so much to celebrate. We maintained in-person learning all year long. Our students participated in clubs, theater, sports, concerts, social events, volunteer opportunities, art shows, debates, retreats, and so much more. And we have another incredible class of seniors graduating in just 2 weeks. Before we continue with tonight's meeting, we want you to know that we, the board, continue to pledge our commitment to ensure an inclusive learning environment that empowers each and every student to achieve a fulfilling life. Thank you for your time and for listening. We can now continue with our working session. We'll begin with our first agenda item, which is the strategic plan. Draft, Dr. Waterman.
Thank you, President Dillon. So we're closing in on completing the first step of our strategic planning journey, which is the development of a mission, vision, motto, values, portraits, goals, strategies, and key performance indicators. And I want to emphasize this is just the first preliminary step in this journey. All of the items that I just mentioned are included within the 2-page draft document that is in your packet. So the last time the strategic planning team met was on Tuesday, April 19th. And since then, our strategic planning core team, our administrative team, the LTCAC last Wednesday, and then our community as a whole through a stakeholder survey have had the chance to weigh in on the draft plan. And so tonight, our Board of Ed has that same opportunity. And within the process that Consortium for Educational Change uses, we identify the goals as the long-range objective that we are continuously striving to achieve. So there's 5 of those in our draft plan. The strategies that are aligned to each of the 5 goals outline the broad work that we must do to improve. And of course, if we make progress towards the strategies, our goals are going to continuously improve and we will achieve our mission and our vision. Ultimately, each of these strategies are going to have an action plan that's attached to them that will be more specific and narrower than the strategies themselves. So tonight, in addition to that, the two-page plan, I want to put the focus on the goals and strategies section of page 2. We have 5 goals, and really the purpose is if you think that these 5 goals are not the best long-range goals for our district, then we of course need to identify what is missing. And if we think that there's something on this list that shouldn't, then we need to identify that as well. And then just overall, what consensus feedback does the Board of Ed have regarding the draft plan? And so what we will do is, this is sort of the last step in the feedback loop after April 19th. We'll take all of this, tonight's, plus the LTCAC's feedback, plus the survey, plus the core team, plus the administrative team, and that will be the purpose of our final meeting with the team on Wednesday night, which is our final session. So really, it comes down to kind of what we've done throughout the spring is, what parts of the 2-page draft plan can the board support, and then what do you feel like is missing, and what do we need to take back to the team for a little more work on it. So with that, I'll kind of open it up, and then of course, if any of the board member reps have any thoughts or additional comments to make, I'll give them that opportunity. But really, we're just looking for the consensus feedback from the board on where we're at.
This is really, I thought it was really, really comprehensive, and I really appreciate all the work that everybody's put into this, and again, for taking the initiative to do this, as we haven't had something like this before. This is huge. Did you say, Brian, that the survey results, which I know the survey closed on Friday?
It did, yep.
So Wednesday, they're going to present the results of that?
Yep.
And it went out to everyone, right, in the community, anybody who?
It did go out to everyone, yeah. So that closed on Friday. We turned over just the raw data to a Consortium for Educational Change, and they'll have it ready for Wednesday night.
Right.
How was the turnout on that?
I think we had 521 responses. Yep.
Good response
At
rate.
some point near the end of this, and certainly before June 13th, when we're going to present our plan for consideration, I'll tabulate all of the survey, because we've given a couple surveys, obviously the emails, the mailers that have went out, so I'll have some data on that so that the board has an idea of sort of how comprehensive the input process was.
Brian, can you elaborate again? So from our goals and strategies sections, what after this portion is done, then what is the work that endures after this from you and your administrative team? And the reason I'm asking that is I'm trying to jive this all together, so I'm trying to understand what comes after, so I can roll it back up into this and see if there's any input from that.
So 2 primary functions. The first one is we want to develop an action plan for each one of these strategies.
Okay.
That's the first thing, and that's really the work that we're going to do to achieve the strategy. The second piece is, if you look at the key performance indicators, those are just suggestions from the planning team on the metrics that they feel are important, but we have to, over time, develop a scorecard or a dashboard that identifies what the benchmarks are for each of those key performance indicators.
Okay. And that's actually one of the areas that I that caused me some pause and some pondering is the key performance indicators. And especially if you say that these were suggestions, it would be, before we actually land on key performance indicators, I think it would be worthwhile to have like an overall discussion about what's out there, what else might we be able to pull in that might not be part of this list. I'm thinking we're starting up the science test again. Does that have a place as a metric? And what else is out there that exists that we might be able to pull in for metrics for different portions of our population? I think, don't we do map testing for some portions of our population? So that's kind of where my head is at, and before the key performance indicators and then how we're measuring these goals are so important. So I could see that as a centered discussion just on those alone. Before we actually, commit to that those are the right ones.
So I know that through this process, the board is going to have an opportunity, if you see something that's not measured, that the board is going to have input into that once we get into the development of the scorecard and the dashboard.
Would some of these also be dictated by what we might need to provide to the state, I'm sure, too? I mean, that'll be part of how we probably measure some of these things, obviously things like.
Well, yeah, not necessarily though, because really the the ones that are currently listed are basically the consensus feedback from the 10 teams on the
Okay.
strategic planning team that said, these are the key performance indicators we feel are important to measure.
Right.
For example, goal 5 or goal 4, whatever goal it is.
And then just as a reminder, that was made up of obviously people that are here internally and then outside stakeholders too, like our community members. So it's pretty important to reflect their thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, all staff from all work groups, students, community members, alumni, current parents, and future parents as well.
How did the other board members who were participating, did they feel how good about the KPIs that have been outlined here? You were part of that process?
Yeah, those goals and strategies is interesting because I agree with Dawn on the key performance indicators. If there's other ones out there that we need to look at, I definitely would love to, see and keep open to that. Question for you, Brian. The ones at the bottom, the maroon at the bottom, are these are more priority? I was trying to figure out the table.
Yeah, so the bottom row are the strategies that are aligned to the goal. And then ultimately, each strategy is going to have an action plan to accomplish that strategy.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of, I was trying to bite my tongue for a little bit and see if there was other feedback. I've been part of the not the core team that Michael sits on, but Michael, Allison, and I are part of the strategic planning committee, and then I had the real benefit of attending the LTCAC meeting last week, where we saw this page for the first time. It was hot off the presses at that meeting, and I sat at a table, and we talked about it for 30 to 45 minutes, and I think there were a lot of good insights that came out of that process, things that I hadn't even thought about, being super involved in all this, and I believe they're coming next week. Is that right? LTCAC?
Actually, they're not, but we're going to
they're not,
provide the
okay.
consensus here. We are going to
okay.
provide the consensus, but Kate can't make it next week. So.
Oh, gotcha, okay. I didn't want to front run some of their feedback, but, maybe I can share a little bit of what.
Actually, please do, yeah,
okay.
please do, because here's also what happened. So from the time that April 19th happened until now, we don't make changes to the draft plan until we get feedback from all the groups. So this is sort of the last step in that, but Julie is probably going to provide some really good ideas that the LTCAC have already given that I will say with confidence is going to make their way into the plan
Okay.
after Wednesday night.
Okay, and so, and for those of us that were there at the last strategic planning retreat, maybe you feel differently than I, but I felt like the KPI part of the day was the last part of the day, and once your table group was done, you could go. So it was, if it had been ordered differently, perhaps some of the conversation would have been more robust on certain, it was robust, but I felt like once we were done, and that was kind of it. There wasn't a group dialogue. There wasn't a coming back together across the 10 table teams to share. So, and we had seen that, yes, for the far left goal, this is a lot of what the state looks at. And so LTCAC, total fresh eyes, right, and interested community members. I believe some of the comments were around, some of what we're measuring by. If we're looking at PSAT or graduation rates, those are annual metrics. And wouldn't it be great if we could peel it back a little further and find things that are more frequent? And so we wouldn't just be responding annually to say, oh, wow, this really surprised us. Now we need to create a plan. So
Right.
I think to your point, Dawn, there could be a lot more indicators for student growth and achievement, and it could be disaggregated. There was commentary around, well, it might look good. One of these metrics might feel good, and we might kind of get comfortable with it, but if we peel it back and look at different subgroups, well, maybe not every group is shining as the total. So, common things that I think would be intuitive to other topics we've discussed. But going a little deeper on KPIs, we reviewed the strategies that are listed below and had conversation on some of the more meaningful ones to our different table groups at LTCAC. One person had a comment that they're used to seeing strategies not just one-to-one assigned to goals, but perhaps one of these strategies might actually address 2 goals, and that might be helpful to see which of these actually span across goal categories, because we might be able to achieve more quickly if we took and tried to action some of those strategies that had broader coverage sooner. What else did we? Those were some of the takeaways on this page that we focused on. They also.
Well, I think the LTCC also talked about one of the strategies in Goal 5 really being more applicable to Goal 2. So they did some of that moving around, or at least suggesting goals move around. They talked a lot about the vision, right? About the wordsmithing of the vision. That's something that's going to happen here in the next few weeks as well. And that's kind of going, not only LTCC, but the core team feedback. Wednesday night will be another chance for the planning team to do the same exercise.
There were comments, just if we go back to the earlier page, that mission and motto had a lot of similar language, perhaps, and we like the three, honor tradition, innovate together, and inspire the future, but perhaps that belongs in one but not both. People noticed that the word student was missing from the system portrait, so that jumped off the page, like where's, and again, all of us so deep into the work, this sounds great, this sounds great, but it's great to have a kind of a fresh set. So I'm really interested in the survey. It's great that 500 plus people responded and hopefully gave some meaningful feedback through that process too.
There was also a lot of talk, at the last meeting, it was fairly close. It was, I think 6 of the tables were okay with core values being statements versus one word, but 4 of the tables felt like the core values should really just be one word, like excellence, or communication, or collaboration. So I think that's going to be a healthy dialogue on Wednesday night that we will determine, are our core values, are they one statement, or are they more words, just one word? So
I was one of the people on this, on the teams also, and I, first of all, want to say I thought the process has been incredible to get the stakeholders of the community, teachers, students, board members, all types of staff, administration, all involved, all working together for this common goal. And I think the process has been really fantastic. At the last meeting we did, going through a lot of these missions and mottos, we did have a lot of discussion about, the words and the wordsmithing. And so what you're saying is we're still going to be going through and wordsmithing quite a bit.
it's one of the functions of Wednesday night, but it's also the function between Wednesday and when the final draft plan comes to the board in June. That's going to be our opportunity to wordsmith.
Awesome. Because one of the things that our team specifically had talked a little bit about is making the words just real and not real buzzwords, and just to keep them as clear and real as possible so that we don't lose sight of what it actually is.
Yeah, I think Wednesday night will be great. I had maybe a similar thought, Allison. We had, at the last session, I was at like every session, an incredible table, and there was some good dialogue coming about regarding the word tradition and whether the word excellence is a better fit. Do we honor excellence? Is tradition, leaving out people who aren't alums or who didn't grow up in the community or might be new to the community? And I thought, that's a good, and other aspects of the word tradition that might not be as inclusive to everyone. And I thought it was a great idea, but then with so much that we have to accomplish in that 7-hour period, there's not time for the coming back together. So I think this Wednesday will be, I don't want to say last call, but time to have those. And so if our table group wrote that down, but the other 9 didn't, because they were on to the next, they were focused on vision, we were so focused on mission, whatever it might be, it doesn't bubble up to being a popular choice. But if we could just have 5 minutes with the group to say, hey, what about this idea, to see if it's resonating with more people. But it sounds like Wednesday is that time, and I'm excited for that opportunity then. I think that'll kind of tie up some loose ends that are out there for me.
So, just one of the things is also being part of the core team and the overall strategic planning team. One of the things is related to the state science test, at least in our table, in our group, was talked about, and with science teacher present, that the state test does not really have anything to do with where students are when they're taking the exam, and that it doesn't really count, and they haven't used it in any way other than the number of students taking the test. And so the group questioned the relevancy of the test as being a KPI for a measurement, since there was not a whole lot of meaning that the state was utilizing other than students taking the exam.
That's helpful.
It's very impressive, all that's been done, but the one thing that strikes out to me is when we look at goal 1 under the key performance indicators, kind of maybe to piggyback a little bit on Dawn about what the different metrics are and the breakdown of that. I know we've spent so much time as a board going over so much stuff, and what are those? So if these are, I don't know, whether like 7 or 8 of the key indicators, is there going to be a breakdown within that of the groups that we've talked about? Whether you have IEP 504, you have the diversity aspect, and really, you know, that's how we can track that to see where it is. And that's what I would like to see, because I think what you had said, Julie, was you could have an outlier, you could have that, but really, are we really addressing, when you look at it, all students? Because we want it meaningful for all. And I don't really, when we just look at that here, I don't see how that is meaningful for all. And then following up on it, how do you measure success post-secondary? I mean, that's really, is it that they graduated from the same school? Like, what is that metric that you use? So I guess that's a little bit bothersome for me, is the
Yep.
metrics and how much of a breakdown are we going to get?
Yeah, and we're going to have a chance to flesh that out much more. So these are just the broad areas that the planning team said we need to make sure that this data is included. But once we get to the development of the dashboard, then we're going to be able to drill that down and identify subgroups. And there's going to be way more metrics involved than just this. This is not, these are just suggested metrics from the strategic planning team. After we get the plan in place, then we have to go to the next step, which is the action plan and the specific metrics within each of these key performance indicators.
Because I think I'd like to hear that, because I think that's really key. Because we've spent so much time as a board over the last, I don't know, 6 months, and it's all blurred together, but.
I mean, think about just the data presentation from October
Right.
and
Right.
all of the data that was included in that. I mean, we sort of want to, strip that down, start over, and base it on this. Because this is how, and this is what we've said for the last couple of years, is we've never taken the time to define what success looks like for academics. But this is what we're going through right now to do that. And so we want that presentation each fall to mirror the school report card and to mirror how we have defined success, which is through the strategic planning process.
So you envision then, what I'm hearing you say is that you envision then breaking this down into subsets to mirror what we've talked about?
Yep.
And to do that, whether it be from, the African-American students, to Latinx, to whatever you're
Right.
going to do within each of these subgroups.
And not only for presentations, but for a scorecard that we can monitor progress.
That's what I would
Yeah.
like to see, that,
Yep.
especially when you
It's
have.
not about a one-time presentation and then waiting till the next year. We will develop a dashboard that allows us to monitor progress on this.
But starting fresh
Yep,
with it. And then what
starting
about,
fresh.
where does equal opportunity schools play into this?
So that's a great question. I mean, as I look at these strategies, I think equal opportunity schools is our action plan for strategy 1 within goal 1. Because essentially it's providing a rigorous, engaging, and equitable learning experience for all students aligned with district vision. EOS becomes the action plan, and all that has gone on to the implementation, that becomes the action plan for strategy 1 and goal 1.
And just to add on to your point, Jill, you made me think of another great observation from that LTCAC group or the table I sat at. They kind of came away with, at least on goal 1, that these sound like ways others measure, like external parties measure our school by, which is actually true, right? We had a little lesson at the strategic planning about what our scorecard for the state is based on, and 50% is graduation rate, and 15 is your SAT, ELA, and math, or whatever it might be. But maybe additional measures could be how we want to see ourselves. So they kind of had this distinction of all this sounds like how an outside body might rate LT and Hinsdale Central and all these other schools, but there might be more that we could come up with that we want to be measured by. And there were ideas, nuanced ideas like how many retakes are people taking? Like it went back to kind of more minutia and more things specific
At what point
to
do we
us.
break that down to make sure that that's incorporated in here? Maybe I'm being naive in that regard, because if we adopt this, how are we assured that that's going to be broken down so that we can track that information?
So it's not part of the drilling down within each key performance indicator is not part of the CEC process during the plan. It's part of the development of the scorecard and the dashboard.
So
Like, I
would
think
that be the action plan?
That's the action plan, yeah.
Okay, so the action plan, because,
Like, for example, I'll just say, like, next week, actually 2 weeks from now, our whole administrative team is meeting with our consultant from CEC to start the action planning process. And that is starting to drill down the indicators, but also getting a start on the scorecard and the dashboard that will come as a
but I
result.
see action as like, you had just described it as equal opportunity schools. But that's not a breakdown. I guess that's what
Right,
I mean.
to-
So like,
well,
if you're
but-
looking at, you have like up here on a high level,
Yep.
like, okay, graduation rate, right? But then let's say we have, I'm just throwing out a number, so like, 3% that don't graduate. How are we breaking down that 3% that don't graduate, and how are we assured then that that will be broken down? Because that's not an action, that's not part of the
Yeah.
action plan, the breakdown.
And that's not part of this initial step of having a draft plan in place. That's going to come after. That's the work, right? I mean, this is what we've talked about is like, this is the first step, and it brings consistency to what our vision is. But the real work starts after this, when we're taking these indicators and identifying all of the individual metrics that are going to go into these indicators.
Oh, but who identifies those individual metrics?
That's going to be, so that really at the core of this, the strategic planning team is the what, which is this plan, the administrative team and the leadership team is the how. So that's the action planning piece and the metric piece.
And then we as a board then, I mean, this is,
But I'm going to like, throughout that, once we get to the point where we're developing the scorecard, I want to have board input on that to see, once we have the metrics we're going to report upon, certainly I want to share that with you guys and get input on that.
which I appreciate and I trust that you would. I just wanted to mirror what we've talked about, because I would hate for us to lose track on that, especially when you're talking about the achievement gap, when you're talking about leaving so many people out. I just want to make sure that when we are moving forward with progress,
It's got to
and
be a
what
part
we're
of that.
tracking.
Yeah, and there's a couple different things, right? We want to honor the work of the strategic
Correct.
planning team, one.
I appreciate that.
We also want to honor, I mean, this is great timing because the state is laying out a new school report card, which is coming in October, and so that has a variety of metrics that we want to honor that as well. So all of that's going to be incorporated. We're going to rely on both of those processes to identify which metrics we should value.
Well, and maybe it's as simple as adding, after it says Goal 1, key performance indicators, parentheses, disaggregated and aggregated where applicable, or something.
Well, let me ask this question, like,
I know
are
what I was trying to
there
say.
metrics
words.
that the board would like to see included on here? Like, are there indicators that the board would like to see included?
You mean like of like the graduation rate, those kind of things? that
Or
we're
new
missing?
bullet points.
Like, basically, that's a better way to say it, new bullet points. So the strategic planning team has said, in Goal 1, we believe, and this is consensus data, remember, it's 10 teams, 85 people, through their activity, said graduation rate, PSAT, SAT, ELA math, GPA, ninth grade on track, AP dual credit, post-secondary success, and EL proficiency are the key indicators for that goal. But if there are other ones that we want to add in there, we can.
I would be curious to ask, where is the special ed aspect of it? Like, where is the success of IEP trackings? And are
I
we?
think that's where, when you look at graduation rate, we should be disaggregating that by
Right.
You
special
could
education
still
group.
graduate and have an IEP, but are you having success within your IEP in graduating?
But like
Are you
PSAT,
meeting your goals?
GPA, that's where we're going to disaggregate all of these indicators by population group.
But I think, no, but I think in general, like, how many students do we have enter with an IEP? Can we solve those? And then, like, let's say I'm just, like I said, just throwing out a number, there's 300 kids that start, like we have with or maybe 100 per class or whatever that number. I'm sure we'll learn later what that number will be.
Yeah.
It'll be riveting.
But your desire is
Be able
to
to
make
fill us
sure
in.
that
But,
if we're reporting on that data, you want to make sure that we're pulling that data out.
No,
Yes.
is that something that's key to report upon? Because if
I
we're,
think we think so. I mean, yeah.
right,
yeah.
but is that then a separate bullet point? I don't know if I'm using the right terms, because that's.
Yeah, I don't think it's a
Well,
separate bullet
It seems like
point.
these are higher level, like the bullet point is bigger. I'm sorry if I interrupted
No,
you.
no.
I'm just trying to
It seems
understand.
like
No,
it's, at this point, where we're at in this process is approving a higher level, like overarching goal. And then Jill, to your point, like, in that strategic, or in the action plan process is where they'll break down all those nitty-gritty little line details that we want, that
But
tells
I
this
don't think you're going to
complete
break
story.
down, though, in this nitty-gritty, how many kids were able to enter with an IEP and then graduate without an IEP, or a 504, or something like that, because that should be our,
Yeah.
like, as a school, we should want to be able to offer those tools and everything to have that for the
So I think, though, that you're not talking about the indicator, you're talking about how we disaggregate the indicator. So
No, I'm
like-
talking about it as an indicator, because you had first asked about adding a bullet point, and that would
Okay.
be one that I would think, like, are we,
Which one
capturing
do you,
everything.
which one, say that again, which one do
She
you think
wants
should be added?
She wants a new bullet point that says progress,
IEP tracking?
IEP progress.
I mean,
So
I'd leave that up to the
Yeah.
professionals
Yeah.
to get the right verbiage on that.
Yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
use the wrong language, but if a kid comes in and has 6 goals for the school year, and they're consistently never meeting those 6 goals, and
Right.
we've gone 4 years at LT and they didn't meet a goal, that's something we should pay attention to.
Yeah.
But if there's demonstrated progress, and, 80% of the goals are met each year by
Right,
the
what's
student.
success?
Yeah, we'd
Right.
have to calibrate to what it
But
is.
I don't think that's success within your category of graduation, because you can still graduate and not have really met your IEP goals, because then we just adjust them.
Yeah. I
But
think this is,
also,
That's that kind of breaking down what you.
I think this is growth, what we're talking about, is how are we measuring growth
all.
for all? And I
Right,
think,
because I don't know that you're measuring growth from a student graduating with an IEP.
exactly, it's too aggregated, and I think what I hear you saying, Jill, and I would agree entirely, is that for each population of students, we may have to look at things a little bit differently. And this is where I think it's great that these are suggestions for key performance indicators, but I think in developing the action plan, that Brian, you and your team, the administrators, really need to come back and say, we took these suggestions, but we really feel that this set of key performance indicators is really going to give us the best information. Because in my mind, as I read this, even though it doesn't say this anywhere in the plan, one of the things that we should be pursuing is growth for every student, right? And we do say, for all students, I'm losing my spot here, but if we're about that, if we're trying to ensure that we have growth for every student, we're going to hear a special education presentation later today. Even though we've never talked about it, I'm assuming we do response to intervention. They're going to be, do we, Leslie? Do RTI here, or some version, new, maybe it's not called RTI anymore, maybe that's outdated by this
That's,
point?
yeah, slightly outdated term, but yes, there's a way of,
There's a tiered,
Yes.
and so there's going to be some key performance indicators of growth within those, I would imagine, that it's not going to be to all students, but it's going to be an important subset of information to capture.
Because I feel like we're leaving some populations out. I mean, is that MAP testing, or is MAP testing too broken down? Because you also have, when you're looking at graduation rate, is that graduation with a certificate, or is that graduation with a diploma? And where are you circling that in? I guess I just don't want to leave populations out.
well, I think most of these indicators, all of these indicators we should be able to pull out all populations. I guess that's what I'm confused about. So like for PSAT, for GPA, for ninth grade on track, we can disaggregate that by any population group, and we will. Is that what you're?
No, I'm just, okay, maybe I can reframe it. Is it appropriate, is there metrics that would only apply to IEP students or 504 students that would be appropriate to have with a key performance indicator?
if I can,
Yeah, jump in
I would
there,
add, yeah, I would say no.
That's my,
We need to include our special education students in the metrics that we are measuring all students by. That's our charge, to make sure that we are providing a rigorous education and curriculum for students to be meeting grade level. We know that within special education and students with 504s, any disability, they may have a harder time meeting some of those on grade level standards. So then that's where the IEP or 504 team comes into place and creates a plan that is specific to that student. That's kind of the key part of that, is that it's going to be so specific, and the growth measurements are in that plan. So it would be really
and then
difficult.
we're going to break it down under that specifically for an IEP student to see if there's growth for those IEPs.
Within the plan, individualized for each student. So it would be irresponsible for us to lump all those students together, because their metrics are so different in terms of what they need to progress toward. For one student, it's something with, math and a math disability. For another student, it's a cognitive disability. So we would still look at those students in this data. We'd pull out, we'd disaggregate to see how are our students in special ed? Are they hitting the graduation rate of our other students? If not, we can start looking into why. But in terms of very specific progress for each of those students, we would leave that to the
I wouldn't say specific
team.
progress of them, but is there a metric to measure IEP overall success? What is the goal for an IEP student? I guess maybe we can circle back on this later, maybe next week, but is the goal to be able to do a weight, is there success when you have 100 students within the class, and then when you graduate, you only have 70 kids with an IEP. So
That
that's
wouldn't,
success.
yeah, that wouldn't be
Be a metric
appropriate,
you
just
would measure.
because, yeah, it's so individualized. I think what we do is we monitor the indicators through the state to make sure that we're not keeping students in special education when they don't need it, that we're not
That was
keeping students
exactly
in
right.
more special education classes than they need to be in. So those are indicators that the state has built out and monitors, and we monitor, separate from just the bigger picture data of SAT scores and graduation rates. Students who are in special ed, for most of those students, the goal is to graduate high school, and we would not allow them to graduate high school, frankly, without meeting the targets. So if they've met the targets, if they're progressing from class to class and getting the services they need to support them, then their graduation is, you know, the same success as any other student's graduation, and you can feel confident that that student is leaving
So there is no
ready.
goal to, as a department, to have less IEPs.
Not necessarily. We want to make sure that we're not over-identifying, so that's where RTI, or a multi-tiered system of support, comes into place. We never want to give a student more than they need. We don't, if they don't need special education in order to progress, we don't want to give them special education supports, but when students need it, they need it. So you don't want to get caught in that, like, it's a bad thing. You just want to make sure that it's.
It's not something to track, you don't think,
correct.
as a key
I wouldn't
performance
think so.
indicator. You think, track it underneath it as,
And use the other indicators for special education students that are, that we already monitor, and certainly the leadership team will share more
I know
about
we're
that
like really
later.
jumping ahead, but I think there's going to be a great presentation.
There's just a lot of excitement, I appreciate that, but I hope that clarifies, and I'm happy to bring more
Because
information
that was just my
too.
concern, like, are we leaving populations out?
And maybe asked differently, Leslie, if you, and I assume we're very proud of our, and I think we are very proud of our special education program. If we were to become world-class and like people are moving to our district from all around the western suburbs, it would be because we are great on X, Y, and Z. You know, what would the marketing, if we did marketing materials, what would it look like? And would the indicators that we have for goal 1, which is what we're kind of focused on, are those the right indicators, or is something missing, I think is also another way to ask. Or is like, oh, well, no, to be known as best in class, we should really report X thing, which I don't know the name of or what it would be. And if so, then we'd love to put it on the list. But if this covers everything and it's,
Then
then
that's- right, that's the
then it's
question.
fine.
Yeah, I don't see anything on that list that is missing that I would
Okay.
put in specifically to make people confident that our special education program is successful for our students. Again, it's, though we call it a program, though we have obviously a department that addresses, it's so individualized, it's really hard to pull that down and
So there's
say.
not one general metric for that
Not
because it's
really.
individualized.
Yeah, or it's built into these, and we would just continue to monitor that population of students within the larger metric, and make adjustments to the programming. You know, if we got to a point where we have 400 special ed students and 70% are not graduating, obviously, that's a very
You
exaggerated
could see that metric
scenario.
within something.
Within
Yes, and we
graduation
would
rate.
be flagging that and looking to see what the heck is
Okay.
going on and how do we address that,
It doesn't need
for
to
sure.
be individually.
Right,
Okay.
yeah.
Although I think with tiered interventions, right, with students who are not necessarily part of the special education program, but have been designated as needing some level of tiered interventions, we should be able to track the movement among those tiers to understand if those, I'm sure progress monitoring, you probably have to do that to
Yeah,
see.
there's different levels of that, so you're either looking to see if students are moving through the tiers, i.e. have they started within general education and they're needing layered supports and they finally get to a place where we're doing a special education evaluation and being found eligible. We've tracked that. Obviously, I was part of the special ed leadership team in my previous roles, so I can speak a little to that. But we've always tracked our initial referrals. How many students are we getting each year that are, it's at a high school, you don't expect to have a ton of initial referrals. Most students have been, I'll say, caught. Either their learning issues have been noticed before, but we track that always. And then we also track, like, where is that coming from and what are the needs? Is it learning disabilities? Is it emotional difficulties? What are those? So there's a lot of tracking that happens. And then in terms of, to your point, of the different levels, okay, we've tried this, is it working, and how do we know it's working? For some students, that might be an attendance marker we're looking at. For some students, it might be a more social, emotionally based marker. So we look at all that data through our student problem-solving teams, the special education leadership team, our 504 approach. All of those things work together to make sure that we're not over-identifying students or moving them through those tiers without, good fidelity to the.
Yeah, so it's almost like for the scoreboard and for the dashboard, we're looking at some high-level indicators and metrics, but then with each, in each area, we may have some breakout sets of information that's going to look at that in a deeper way, which I think is fine. I think it's fine if we can't include all of it on our dashboard and our scoreboard, as long as we're looking at it individually and understanding it individually. You know, the only, I'd still say that this is the more of the challenge in the work of the administration to come back and say, are these the right indicators? Because you know what's available, whereas we don't know everything that's available. And then the other aspect that's hard for me on these is that a lot of these, unfortunately, are one point in time measurements. And so we're not looking at groups of cohorts moving through. You know, you know, map testing is something that when you do it for everyone, you can see growth from spring to spring or fall to spring or fall to fall, however a school wants to look at it. But I don't think we have anything like that here that really helps us understand the success of a student moving through and if there's growth of, right? Do we?
No, we don't. MAP is not normed for high schools. So
Yeah, I know
we
it's
give
not.
it freshman year just to compare it to the 8th grade numbers that we get, but that's the end of it, really. And even then, it's kind of lost some of its nuance. It helps us with kids who struggle more than with, it really doesn't discern for our higher achievers.
Yeah, so it's hard to look at an SAT, you know, composite score from year to year, knowing that we've got different kids in front of us that have, you know, that's a different makeup. And I understand that we can, you know, as a test to the curriculum and so forth, we can probably
Well, we
assume-
do take a look at PSAT 9, PSAT 10, and SAT as cohort groups and growth
Right.
over time. The problem is, for the last 2 years, we gave neither the PSAT 9 nor the PSAT 10, so this was the first year our students who were juniors took any version of an SAT. So it's going to take us a few years to gain that back, although we did use that data to look at cohort groups, but again, it's kind of a large aggregate, but we also saw that our students who struggled tend to not grow at the rate of those who didn't. So trying to determine how to make those gains there. So there are some things that we do, but like you said, we have over 300 courses, so there's kind of a variance even of what students are focusing on, but with English and math, those tend to be the ones that we do measure.
Yeah, makes sense. And I understand that the science may not be, and it's not something that we've been using, and it's new, and when they change tests, that's problematic. But, you know, as we move into next generation science standards, right, we have to have a way to measure how we're doing in that. So I would mention, maybe it's not the right time to bring that in here now, but I imagine down the road, we're going to probably want to have that as part of it. Just to switch gears a little bit to comment on what Julie said about tradition. Brian, you and I talked about tradition, and when Julie said something about excellence, that makes more sense to me than tradition on its own, and I think the comments I had for you were, you know, I can appreciate and agree with what, how that could signal to people if you're not from this community, if you move here, you don't know what the traditions are, you weren't an alumni and everything, but the fact that LT has a history, a tradition of excellence is, I think, the thing that really resonates for me is it's still kind of missing, and we had a lengthy discussion, Brian, when you asked for board feedback. I'm glad you're wordsmithing because, like, I see rigorous down below in the bottom section, but, you know, provide a comprehensive, innovative education rings differently to me than provide a rigorous, innovative education. So that's just a point. One of the things that I kind of resonates with me in goal 3 of high quality, diverse staff is I think we have a lot of excellent teachers here, both teachers, and we have a tradition of teachers staying here, right? A lot of teachers, we have a long tenure, they have longevity here. So I would love to see something about retaining our talented teachers, retaining our leaders as part of this, because I think it signals that that's important to us, and we want to make sure that we are, in fact, retaining our leaders and teachers who are excellent and hopefully will be continued leaders here at the school. And then I guess ultimately, we're going to get another stab at this, another look at this after you get through the next meeting.
Yeah, we're going to bring this back on June 13th for
Yeah.
consideration.
Okay. And how long is it after you guys do your next meeting where you cull it and get it to the point where it's ready for the next draft?
So we have to have this ready by June 8th, because that's when the packet will come to the board.
I was going to say, if you can give a little more time, it's such a meaty subject, and getting it midweek, you know, and especially on a weekend like this past weekend with Mother's Day and lots of other conflicting things, if it's ready sooner, I would love to see it sooner, so we have more time to digest it and consider it.
I think I would just add to it, though, that overall, like, from the high level, and to your point, like, Dawn, about retention, some of these things, they are listed here, so where we get into, where I'm going to be really excited about it is where we get to the action plan, which is what will give us all those metrics that you want to drill down to, that level, that'll get much, much deeper. For now, I think it really is for us to, as our job, to make sure that, to your guys' point, we haven't missed any KPI that that we didn't know about, or we wouldn't know about because we wouldn't have access to that. And as long as we're covered with that, and we get that feedback, I think, from administration and the community, I think we should feel very confident and good about moving forward on something like this so that we can get to moving into some kind of action plan, knowing that probably it'll change probably and adjust along the way, because this is the first time we've done an exercise like this. So as information comes into us, we might have to adjust or say, like, okay, well, that wasn't giving us the information or the data that we thought it would, so we might have to make some changes. So I'll be really excited if we can move this forward. Again, like I said, making sure that we've checked and covered what we need to cover, but also knowing if we have to make adjustments, we can do that too. And that dashboard, Brian, that you were talking about too, that is going to be an actual tool that we'll be able to see on the website, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so that'll be really helpful, I think, for everybody to have access to.
I want to ask just a couple clarifying questions. So the idea of tradition, that's something that's been a popular topic among a lot of the groups. From a board consensus perspective, would you like to see tradition in there or not?
I like how Julie phrased it. Was it excellence? Julie?
Honors excellence instead of honors tradition.
Yeah.
I would like that not to be in there.
The word tradition or the word excellence?
Well, I think excellence should be in there, but tradition, what is tradition? Is tradition bad? I don't know.
Is it relevant?
What is tradition?
Are we talking about the mission statement? I'm sorry.
I think, honestly, either one. Like, it's, that whole idea of tradition has been I know, going all the way back to December when the core team talked about this. In order for, the core team at the time didn't want to lose sight of the fact that LT has been an excellent school since 1888, and we want to honor that. But I think throughout the last couple months, there's been a lot of interesting discussions about that word tradition, and does it help us or does it hinder us by leaving it in there? So I kind of throw that to the board just real quickly to say, do we like that tradition piece in there or not?
I like it. I think the tradition of, the LT tradition and tradition of excellence is incredibly important to the school.
I don't think it says tradition of excellence.
Yeah, that's a
It just
problem.
says tradition.
Yeah,
I'm okay with tradition of excellence.
me too.
But I think just tradition in general, I don't know,
Needs
people could pick
definition.
that apart.
Yeah, I gave the example to Brian when we were talking, like, if somebody was to look at that was moving into the community, like, what would that mean to them? They don't know anything about LT and its traditions, but tradition of excellence, and you just said it now, like, Brian, that we have a long history of excellence. You didn't use the word tradition, but you said excellence. And I think that's probably what was meant in the discussions, probably, is,
So I think, do we not like the term honor then? Is that what, because
no.
I like honor.
I
I think the
honor
clarity
tradition
around
of
tradition of
excellence.
excellence sounds more specific.
Maybe use it as an
honor the
adjective.
honor tradition of excellence versus honor tradition.
That's a great compromise. I think honors tradition is not what I would support on its face. I have a lot of negativity around the word. I sat at a table at LTCC, another alum from my class, and then a woman who is dedicating her time to this group and has put kids through the school, and she's like, I'm not from here. I don't feel anything with this word tradition. I'm not an alum like you two are. She said it 3 or 4 times. And that wasn't the only time I think about that word. But tradition, honors tradition of excellence, sounds like a nice compromise.
I'm okay with that.
I think that's what, I think that's what I've always heard people in this community talk about LT. When we first moved here 2 years ago, it was that the school does have a long history of being an excellent school in all areas for students to go here, so I think that makes sense. The other, just real quick, I thought it was, because I had to read it 3 times before I think I understood, where the section that says, provide a comprehensive, innovative education for every student to promote life. I'm guessing you meant like to promote readiness in life, career, and post-secondary success, or to promote success in life, career, and, well, I think readiness is probably better, but that's just something that jumped out at me when I read it.
I would second that because it's in
promote
there
life.
twice.
I think it's
That's right.
readiness.
It's promoting life success, career success, and post-secondary success.
Oh, then maybe success has to be in there, but without the modifying, like, of what it is, it just reads to promote life.
Are you talking about goal 1?
Yeah,
Goal 1.
yeah,
And similar theme in the
Maybe-
vision statement.
Maybe the one North Star of the vision
yeah.
is where I was
All
looking.
students graduate life.
Because we want them to be alive when they graduate.
That's how people. at
I mean,
last
that's a
week's
win.
Yeah. So, yeah, so
Right.
on both of those, it's
So,
just.
so, yeah, I think
it's a
that
word
They all
life, life was included in there because it was looking at the students overall, like, that are not necessarily going to college. And so it's promoting those, for those students and also students who are college ready to be able to succeed and to go on to do better things. So if there's a way to look at rewording some of it, I think that was the spirit of why life was included.
I liked it,
just
like that
switch
when
the-
we frame it that way.
Is Jill still with us?
Sure, she's.
I'm,
Jill?
I am.
Oh, okay, good. Just want to make sure.
I got it. We want to make sure it's.
I didn't want
ready. Got
okay.
it.
Tradition of excellence, and I am for incorporating success in the North Star statement.
Say that again. What was the last part, Jill? You said tradition of excellence and then what, North Star something?
The idea of incorporating success into the North Star statement
Okay,
that was just discussed, I was just saying I would agree with those comments.
Okay.
great. Awesome feedback.
If I could mention just 2 quick things on strategies that just caught my eye. In the community goal 4, the second one, where it says offer community learning opportunities to expose students to potential career pathways and community services. If there's any way to kind of emphasize 2-way communication, I've just sort of been stuck on this, like, bring more people into the community and it's a win-win, right? There's all these talented people, retirees, younger people who have time and want to be part of the school. And so if there's any way, I don't have a suggestion, but a way to kind of get more of a 2-way communication, because I think it helps the students, but it also helps our presence in the community by kind of breaking down some barriers and letting more people enjoy all the success. And then far left, bottom left, where it says, use current research to inform and bring consistencies to grading practices, seemed a little narrow to me. And I don't have a suggestion, but if we're just going to, it sounds like we're just going to use current research. And we're not going to, layer our thought on it or involve teacher input or involve, it just sounded a little clinical, I guess, to me. And I don't think that was the intent.
I lost you on that last one, Julie. Where were you?
The goal, sorry.
Strategy 2, goal 1.
Strategy 2 under goal 1, where it says use current research to inform and bring consistencies to grading practices. I think could be broadened or softened or more inclusive of the work other angles you're already incorporating into that work.
Yep. Great. All righty. Lots here. Good discussion. All right.
Other
Okay.
feedback?
All right. Thanks, guys. That's great. Excellent. Got a lot coming up on Wednesday. That'll be great. Next up, we have, under finance, the 2023 fiscal year capital outlay request. Brian Stachek.
Thank you, President Dillon.
you.
So just to kind of, again, give everybody a little bit of background on these requests, there is documentation sent out to administration, division chairs, supervisors throughout the district in February annually. And then what we do is we have them talk with staff, whoever they need to discuss with, and then bring the ideas for these capital requests back. They submit them through an electronic portal in the district, and that's how we obtain this information. And so it is a collaborative process that, permeates the district with, like I said, through those division chairs, supervisors, associate principals, all the way down the line. And so then as we accumulate this data, we then bring it back. We obviously administratively look at, what requests are there, what we think we can afford financially, what match up with the academic programs, and then bring to the board these requests, for approval. And as you recall, last month, we had the capital outlay requests that were grant funded, and then also the furniture items, so we can get moving on those. And this is not the remainder of the list, because not all items make it. What we do is we actually ask the submitters to provide essentially a ranking, a 1, a 2, or a 3 on these. 1 meaning, look, we really need to have these for next year. A 2 is, well, we should have these on the radar for the next couple of years. And a 3 is kind of, it'd be nice to have if we have some additional money around. And so when we look at these, we strongly look at those priority requests as well. In addition to that, there are also, in what we receive, there are building modification requests also, which those building modification requests are not here. Those are removed from this list for tonight, and then those will be presented with the building modification requests as we begin to look at those in June for the summer of 2023. So you will see those if they are not repeated. Some of them are repeated, and they'll be on there again from the prior years, but you'll also see potentially some new ones on that list as well as we start talking through that. So that being said, as we continue to build the FY23 budget, and the FY23 budget is the 22-23 school year budget, you'll see before you a list today of the majority of the priority 1 requests that we have. And so what we have here is about $1,700,000 worth of requests. And as you may recall, we also had roughly another $200,000 of another $200,000 of both grant and furniture requests from last month. And so that would bring us to a total request of about $1.9 million for the coming year. If you recall, in March, I had put together a 5-year forecast for the board to review. We had about $1.6 million in there. So this is a little bit higher than what we had originally anticipated looking at. But again, the forecast is done before we see all of this data and before we look at, the items that we really need to purchase. And so we're a little bit higher. I think that right now, I think we'll be able to support that through the budget for next year. We can always make revisions if we have to going forward, because again, there's still not a lot of data available for next year's budget. And as I'm looking through one of the line items that we have on the budget, our corporate personal property replacement taxes, again, the state told us to budget, the Illinois Department of Revenue said, well, maybe $5.2 million, and these are all estimates. They don't stick to those numbers. $5.2 million. I originally budgeted $4.7 million, which was about $1.2 million, $1.3 million higher than what we normally would receive. Through May, we have received $9.4 million. And so something like that it's really unusual. We'll have to continue monitoring. I don't think it's going to go back down to the $3.5 million or whatever next year. I think in the 5-year forecast, I think it had $4.2 million. I think we'll probably be above that as well. So I think some of these extra dollars will have the ability to come from potentially some additional revenue source. Now, again, I will obtain that information in August. So we'll have to kind of take a look and see. And as you can see, the state was, the Illinois Department of Revenue was clearly off as well in their projections. So we have to kind of keep an eye on those numbers. That being said, you have the list in front of you of all of the capital recommendations. A couple of items I would like to point out. There was a question about, well, how much did we spend last year versus what did we spend? What are we looking at this year? And so with this $1.9 million, we're probably about $600,000 higher than what we were, $500,000 to $600,000 higher than what we were in the prior year. And just to kind of give you an idea of a couple of the items that are different that we haven't seen before. If you look on line 4 of the spreadsheet that I have in there for you, the district has 8 10 passenger vans, and I believe 4 of those are 2011 models. And so they are 11 years old, and we're looking to replace 2 of those. The number of $45,000 I'd like to say is, for each, so 2 of them at $90,000, I'd like to say is accurate. However, I'm not quite sure at this point. Ultimately, it'll be a question of, prices are dramatically changing on new vehicles all the time. And so that's something we'll have to kind of see. We also potentially have the option to purchase those through the state purchase program, and we'll look into that as well. And then, of course, the other factor is with supply chain issues, will we even be able to obtain them? So those are some things we're going to have to look at, but we want to replace at least 2 of those, and then kind of look going forward every year at potentially replacing maybe another 1 to 2. So we start getting rid of some of those older model vans and bringing in some newer ones as well.
And Brian, you're saying that 45K each.
That's what I'm saying right now, and I don't know for sure if when we start looking to purchase them, if that's what they'll be, and again, if we can even obtain them. It'll be interesting to see. But that's, again, that's one of our recommendations. The other one on here that's also, if you look on line 9, it's sort of a technology item, but it's also related to school security. And we have throughout the buildings, we have security systems with security cameras. And what we're running into is a situation where the head end, the main, computer module that operate the cameras is old and is becoming extinct. And what's happening is we're having a situation where we're not able to retrieve the data as long as we need, because this isn't we're running VHS tapes any longer. For those of you who remember VHS tapes, this is all digital data on these cameras, and so that head end really needs to be replaced at this particular point so that we can store data and go back and look at those security security footage as needed. And so really, the $110,000 for that particular item is just that. It isn't the addition of any cameras, because at this particular point, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to add more cameras, because we're not really able to store a lot of that data at this point anyway. So it really makes sense to go with the, again, that head end software and machinery, get that in place first for next year, and then move forward from there with some additional cameras, which potentially we could maybe add a few next year, depending on what budget numbers look like. But I think this is a good place for us to start with that. And then again, as we're just kind of talking about some of the higher numbers here of what's driving up some of the expense from last year. Finally, we move down to technology. And so when you look at the technology section, essentially beginning on line 32, last year we had about $900,000, $911,000 worth of technology. Here we're about $1,350,000. So really that is the bulk of what we've talked about as far as the increase goes. And you'll see on here the largest factor here is the upgrade of the networking and the Wi-Fi on line 33, which we're expecting that to cost about $900,000. Now, just so you're aware, that's a net number, $900,000 of really what was, I think, about $1.3 million, but we're also expecting E-rate funds to offset some of that cost. So the offset net number would be about $900,000 to the district. Again, less those funds that we would receive through the E-rate grants to cover the cost of that. And so really, like I said, when you look at that, obviously, the technology is the bulk of what's here, but recall that a couple of years ago we went through a 5-year technology plan. We implemented that along with the one-to-one program as well. And so I think essentially based upon the fact that we have gone to the one-to-one and we've upgraded the networking systems, I think that moving forward, it would probably be expected that we would be looking at $1 million to $1.3 million in technology on an annual basis, because again, once you upgrade your system, if it lasts for 4 to 5 years, 5 years in technology world is pretty much forever, and then you're going back and going back to those items, and then also replacing them again, because that's how technology works, as we know. So. Again, this is in line with what the technology plan has presented to us as it has been presented to us, and so we would obviously want to keep moving forward with that. And so I think numbers like this for technology are going to be common moving forward. And as you recall, also last year, that was one of the reasons we added the technology fee for students as well, because of some of the expense that we're going to see here. Scott, I don't know if there's anything that you would want to add to any part of what I just talked about as far as technology goes, or?
No, I would say there's no surprises here. I mean, we've been planning, phasing different pieces in. Obviously, we moved a few things up to get laptops in the hands of everybody coming out of the pandemic. But that network and Wi-Fi piece is really to update the connect, how our computers connect, and then the connections in the closets, again, to take advantage of the higher speeds that we have. So what we have now is functional, but it would be even better with these new devices. And everything else is standard and a part of a cyclical replacement already.
Was this part of the plan, was this part of the technology plan, this 900 or the 1.3? Was this part of what we talked about?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing on here that we weren't looking to include. And we'll start replacing faculty machines. These desktops are for secretaries or high-end labs where you can't use a Chromebook for students, so your CAD labs, your art labs, engineering labs, that kind of thing, so you need a little more processing power. So yeah, all these things were a part of what we've been looking at, including the phone system as well.
And there's literally 200 desktop PCs that are needed throughout the campuses.
Correct.
Let me elaborate a little bit on that. I talked with Ed Tennant about that today. There's about 1,000 desktop machines still in the district. And so, as Scott pointed out, there are labs that require desktop machines. There are offices that require desktop machines. In addition to that, every one of our teachers actually does have a laptop, but so every classroom also has a desktop machine as well, because if in the event that you have a teacher who is out, the subs are able to continue with the lessons moving forward with the desktop machine that is in the classrooms. So there's about 1,000 of those throughout the district.
And Brian, because last year we had to replace them as well, too, right?
We did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this volume is probably pretty cyclical.
Yes, that's correct. And again, I think we would see a number in the 200 range probably going forward every year based on the numbers that we have.
And that would include, like you were mentioning, certain classes and certain courses require things like Macs or different types of desktops.
That's correct.
Okay.
I'm looking at the technology, the 5-year technology plan, just briefly. Can you bring that back? Are you asking us to vote on this next week?
On Monday, yes.
Monday.
Yes.
I am looking at it and I see that, I see where it's aligning, but could you bring that plan back next week or send it to us just to have a view of it? I don't even know. I asked for it because at the time we were doing committee meetings.
Sure.
And I was assigned to the technology committee meeting. That's why I had asked for it, but I don't even know if everybody else has it that's new, that came onto the board last year.
Sure.
And then, so this is hitting the ed fund and the O&M fund.
Yeah, the majority of it is the ed fund. There is actually only one item for the O&M fund, and that is line, let me get the line here, line 26, which is a new lawnmower for South Campus. Again, as you see that one, the current mower that we have is 23 years old, beginning to fail, repairs are becoming costly, and it just makes more sense at this point to replace that machine than to continue to repair it.
Okay.
And that's the only one that would be in the ed fund. The rest, in the O&M fund. The rest would be in the education fund.
Got it. And then, just to make sure I have this clear in my head, and maybe you guys are all struggling with it too. It seems like there are 3 parts to our capital expenditures that we review each year. The first was whatever you called the last time, where it was the furniture and stuff.
Furniture and then the grant-funded capital requests. So those all come in?
Part one.
Yes,
And
that's part
then
1.
This is part 2.
Right.
And then part 3 is next month, which I looked it up because I was trying to piece it all together. That was the building modifications,
That's right.
capital requests, and that's that color-coded spreadsheet that's got a bunch of different, greens and so forth.
That's right.
So this stuff, and then what we did last month, is really never part of a big yearly maintained spreadsheet. It's kind of like what
Right.
each year you
That's right.
query everybody. Okay.
That's
thank
correct.
you.
And then I will, that spreadsheet that you're referring to with the building projects on, potential building projects on it, I update that every year. Again, I'll bring over some of the items that were submitted with this. I'll put those in there and then update that with, whatever issues we've had this past year, any items that need to jump onto that list. The existing items that we've not changed will stay on that list. We'll update the life safety because we're doing some life safety work this summer. So we'll update all of that and then bring that back to the board for June. And then also at that point, we would then be making recommendations for projects for the summer of 2023, building renovation projects for the summer of 2023.
When do we get that?
So we'll take a first look at that in June, and then we'll have some conversation around that, and then ultimately, we would ask the board in August to approve those for going to bid. And that's going to be an interesting exercise this coming year because of the cost that's involved, because of the lack of, again, the supply chain issues, lack of equipment. It's going to be, again, it'll be an interesting exercise. I was just having a conversation with our architect this past week, and he is seeing multiple issues across the board right now for people who are going out to bid for projects, for next year and not so much beyond, but really for next year. So we're going to have to talk through that, but we'll have a lot to discuss when we get to that point.
In years past, I think we've received, like the priority 2s and 3s in the list. Do we not get those anymore?
I can certainly provide you with a list of the priority, the 2s and the 3s, certainly.
Because those are what's going to be coming up next year, possibly.
Maybe.
Potentially.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah, I thought you do share those with us like in June, is that?
When we typically have gone through this in the past, I guess what I tried to do was to simplify it.
Yeah,
So that we said, look, here's the recommendation from the administrative team with all of these on here. The list becomes quite lengthy.
Sure.
And we can certainly look at
Yeah.
that and go through it.
These are ones. And
Yeah, I have no issue. I mean, ultimately, what it comes down to is we're being mindful of the amount of money that we have in the budget, and so we're trying to fill those number ones at this point. We can certainly look at the 2s and the 3s.
I'd just love to see them. That'd be
Sure.
great.
I think that's helpful context. And did you say all of the ones made the list, or did some of the top 1 priorities not make the list?
Well, there were some building projects that were in there that were number 1s that I've moved off, here, and we'll bring those back. But I think the majority of the rest of the items, the number 1s, were on there.
Okay, it looks like a nice representation. You've got drums and music program supports, special ed supports, athletics, a lot of with yoga, with the new class that was approved. So it made a lot of sense. But I think it was Allison's point, just helping us frame this with what's not being approved, kind of helps us
Sure.
make the right decision. So.
Sure.
Great. Anybody else? See this to approve on Monday then?
Yeah, that would be for approval on Monday, because then we'll start the process of ordering.
Right.
And I think we're going to run into some issues with some of that here as well, but we're going to at least get going on it and see what happens.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, next we'll move on to the summer extended contracts. Ed Piotrowski, please.
Thank you, President Dillon. Each year in May, we bring forward requests to offer extended summer contracts to 3 main groups of staff members. Those groups are our counselors, select special education staff members, as well as our assistant athletic director. And the purpose for these summer extended days is really for 2 reasons. One is to finish out on work that necessarily needs to be done at the end of the school year. Think of counselors who are working with students who have to make schedule changes if there need to be schedule changes due to the passing of a class or unfortunately if a student doesn't pass those classes. For special education staff as well, for our program coordinators, our inclusion facilitators to finish up the year in terms of IEP work. And then that also extends into the end of the school year or the end of the summer for those groups as well. Counselors are working with students as they enroll in the district to help them get registered, get a full slate of classes. Counselors are also working with their existing students to resolve conflicts as the master schedule gets built out over the summer. And special education works to schedule IEP meetings. Inclusion facilitators are working with our division chairs and our main offices to make sure that students are scheduled and placed in classes appropriately. Across the summer, our assistant athletic director works to do essentially all of the scheduling, essentially a year in advance for the West Suburban Conference. That's the scheduling of officials, not necessarily the scheduling of conference games, but non-conference games, all of our recognitions and awards. That's work that takes place over the summer through our assistant athletic director. And then finally, our college and career coordinator. That person really works over the summer to schedule college rep visits coming in, college events, our college and career night that happens in April. So those are things that happen each year over the summer as we are closing out one school year and getting ready for the next. This request is in line with requests that we have had in previous years, down to the same number of days and the same number of staff members. The one change that we've had this year versus previous years, as you recall, we changed our staffing model within our student services division where the support specialists were now moved into grade level counselor positions. So in the past, there was a separate line item for the student assistance program coordinator who would work 5 days over the summer to get things ready for Red Ribbon Week, Snowball, things like Freshman Experience Day. Those same 5 days have just been incorporated into the general grade level counselor days up above, so that whole 5-day block has been removed. What I would say, and I've spoken to Drew Eder about this as well, is as we go through the summer, if there is a need to do work for Freshman Experience Day, Red Ribbon Week, Snowball, that used to be housed with one particular individual that now it's collectively shared through the division, that we would approve additional hours if it sees fit. So what I'm asking the board, if the board sees that this is okay, is to allow for up to 5 days for those, specifically for Red Ribbon Week, Freshman Experience Day, Snowball type purposes. We will then report back on that to the Board of Education and incorporate that into our yearly memo if we think that this is something that we need to use moving forward. Because of the change from last year to this year in our staffing model, we're not sure if we're going to need it or not, so I didn't feel it was appropriate to request it if we didn't need it. And at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have.
Is the TBD, is the TBD what you were just talking about with the Red Ribbon Week and?
Actually, that TBD is just because we have a counseling position that we have to fill due to the expansion of our staffing model where we added the additional grade level counselor. Because we don't have a name or an associated salary with it, that's why we have the TBD.
Thank you.
We don't have anything specific for the flex days for the Red Ribbon Week. There is, if you look at the very last paragraph of the first page, we do request 5 additional work days for the purpose of student scheduling. That is in the event that we have students who register late over the summer. We had that a couple of years ago where we had an influx of about 50 students that came in from August 1st until the start of the school year. And so we wanted to have additional days for counselors to be able to work to schedule those students so they weren't waiting until processing days. If the board wishes, I can certainly add a paragraph in that talks about flexible, discretionary days for Red Ribbon Week, Freshman Experience Day, Snowball. I'm certainly prepared to do that and more than happy to do that if that's something that the board would like to see in an updated memo for Monday night. But other than that, I don't see any need for any changes. It's the same request that we've had year in and year out, and I think we would continue on with that model.
So you just elaborate on that paragraph for us?
Yeah, I would absolutely. Would you like me to do that? Are you talking now or for the memo for next Monday? Would you like that elaboration?
Yeah, I think for the memo Monday.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can do that. That'd be great.
Yeah, the types of activities that that person would be doing or that the group would be doing would be the same as they have in the past. It just may not be assigned to any one particular person. So Drew may say, okay, this counselor, we're going to have you work on Freshman Experience Day, this counselor for Red Ribbon Week.
Okay, that's great. We like those activities too, very much. Anybody else? Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Then we'll move on to curriculum, the 2022-23 textbooks final update. Second reading, Scott Everdeen, please.
Thank you, President Dillon. So there are the same textbooks that were brought last month. We've had no community members come to inspect the materials. They've been on display in our boardroom, as I mentioned last month at the board meeting. And both of the items here, we discussed a little bit at the board meeting, or at the board meeting last month as well, with the English 4 World Perspectives course. We do feel the 6-year subscription is a value not only to our students, but also to the district. And that's the Uncharted Territory book. And also that A-plus PC computer repair book is something that gives the students the opportunity to practice in a computer environment we can't replicate in our own computer lab. So we do recommend these books for approval. And I will also make the change. I just noticed that it says first reading here. It will say second reading Monday night.
Anybody? Okay, thanks, Scott. We can move on then to the 2022-23 course team summer workshop proposal approval, A through F implementation. Back to you.
All right, so in April, the Board of Education approved 20 summer workshops covering a variety of topics and initiatives. The summer workshop for 3 course teams who had expressed interest in implementing an A to F grading system was deferred to this meeting, the May meeting. We currently have 30 course teams using an A to F system, and this work involves updating the course's curriculum and assessments. Teachers from American Studies, cross-categorical English, and English learner reading have expressed an interest in this as well, and they've requested support through the approval of a summer workshop to complete the curriculum and assessment updates this summer. The 3 course teams include a total of 6 teachers. So as a result, our recommendation tonight is to approve a summer workshop for the 3 course teams outlined in the packet.
I know we pulled this out. I know we pulled this out last month because there was a lot of concerns and questions. Did everyone feel like those were addressed, or did,
I was hoping we were going to get some information tonight regarding all the questions and concerns that were, I haven't had any contact about that myself between last meeting and now.
Yeah, I know the big one was obviously the information on college and university. We're actually in the process of reaching out to 40 different universities. They're essentially a top 20 list of the top 20 schools that our students apply to, the top 20 they're accepted to, and the top 20 that they actually attend. And so that comprises 40 schools. So Scott's talking to each of them to get a little more information about the impact of A to F, the impact of our grading changes on the placement process. We don't have that complete yet. I think that was the big one that came out of the last meeting. I know there's some concerns about just long-term going A to F. We obviously have communicated that we're not going there as a whole school next year. It's going to take us years. We have a lot of curriculum work to do. That's the other piece that came up last month. We have our U.S. history team is going to go through a curriculum review process starting this summer that I think will tell us a lot about how that's going to look long-term. So for this, I think we're sort of just, we have these 3 teams, they've expressed interest, so we just have to make a decision. Do we allow them, actually it's not even allow them, it's do we give them the support to do the work this summer, or do we not give them the support? That's kind of where we're at.
And they've asked for it from us.
Yeah. And maybe I can paraphrase or be an active listener, make sure I'm hearing everything correctly. And I think things that we've seen change on this topic, we now have names of the teams, and we have the course teams in the memo, And there is no firm plan to move the whole school to A through F in the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. There's not really a set timeline. And my understanding is, and I think I heard this in the April meeting too, and I think you just said it, these teams are ready. They're not ones where folks have concern that the curriculum needs major addressing before they begin this work. These teams are ready, and they're probably going to do the work anyway. This approval is just to approve the dollars. And I think, for me, I wanted to make sure we're having enough dialogue on the topic. The thing I didn't want to have happen is these teams, along the way, if they don't tune in and watch all the meetings or hear every minute of every meeting, I didn't want them to falsely assume the board is unanimously 1,000% behind A through F. I think we're all still learning, and we've got more learning to do, and appreciation for the puts and takes on the whole process, and I think we're all individually and collectively trying to broaden that understanding. But these are people who are ready. They're going to do it anyway. And they're not hearing the board say they have to do it. That was my concern. I don't want these teaching teams to say, well, the board's going to, I don't even know if that's the board's place to mandate something like that, but just to acknowledge that we're still learning and growing. Yep. We're not all the way there as 7 individuals or as a group in understanding all the merits and elements. But, to me, I'm supportive of this moving forward because they're ready to do it. They want to do it, and they're going to do it anyway, and this would help them do it by allocating, what was it, $3,500 or $4,000 to support their efforts. Did I understand 90% of what I just said correctly?
That's correct, yep.
Okay,
Absolutely.
okay.
And I would like to piggyback on what you said, Julie, about wanting to support the teachers if they're going to do this. And I think, that's been the communication going on, is that they're going to meet regardless of this. And I think we as a board, I would say, I don't want to speak for the whole board, but myself as a board member would want to support the teachers and give them that support. Whether or not we're going to go there ultimately, these teachers are wanting to do this. They're looking to do this. And I would say my vote would be to support them. That doesn't mean that we're jumping 10 steps ahead, but this is just supporting the teachers with this. Is kind of where my thought is.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think for me, this was it's the conversation, nothing of the conversation last week was intended to, or last week, was it last week? Last month.
Last month.
Yeah, it's all blurring together. Nothing of that conversation was intended to be interpreted as a vote of no support to the teachers, and I want to make that very clear. I think the concern is the more teams that move forward with this, when we don't have clarity and we don't have understanding about the potential larger impacts and potential negative and positive, but we need to understand both, is that how do we dial it back then? So Brian, I'm going to pose that to you. It sounds like from the conversation last month, there's still a lot of board concern, need for more information, clarification. I think that's not just for the board, but also to the community. I heard that last month. So if we move ahead and support the teachers to do this, and ultimately a decision is made not to really move ahead with the A through Fs because it has negative impacts that we're not willing to do. Is that something you would be prepared to dial back then and to revert back to?
Yeah, we're in that position now, right? Because we have 30 teams that have already moved
Right.
ahead. So if we find something at any point, whether that's next week, next month, next year, or 10 years from now, then we would have to dial that back. And so we're 30 teams into this now out of, 250-ish course teams. So I don't have a concern of adding 3 more. I don't think anyone on our team has a concern of adding 3 more. But this is also something where this will give us more input. Having 3 more course teams go through it will give us more input into this as well.
Well, I guess then my challenge and question to you would be, can we more aggressively look at this? So we've talked about the 40 schools that you're going to bring back information. Last month, there was a mention about doing an evaluation of the 30 courses that are already on this. Let's, bring to really aggressively look at this and understand how it's working. Is it working as it's intended? What the potential positive impacts are to students, what the potential negative impacts there are to students, and how that gets transferred into the forward movement of our students into the various sectors where they may go. And I think I would feel a whole lot better because that's the germane issue. are we, for right now, for this place and time, 2022, moving into the 2023 school year and the next couple of years, is this the right thing at this time to reflect what's best for our students? That's my concern.
Yeah, I would request that if any board members have concerns about moving A to F, to also please watch that February board meeting where the two teachers laid out the why and the benefits to students, which I think should directly answer your questions, but we're also evaluating this as we go as well.
But evaluate it as we go. I guess what I'm asking for is, we've got 30 teams, potentially 3 more that are coming on. Can you do a formal survey of those 30, at least the 30, because they've been in it for a while, and share with the board overall what the input is among those 30 teams? And then in addition, when you bring back the information on the 40 schools and anything else that's relevant, can we revisit this topic in totality?
Yeah, so I guess what else would you like to see, in addition to the information that was explained in February, was there any more, like any additional information that you would like to see on top of that in terms of the benefits of the A to F system to students?
I think a reframing of how it's best for all kids.
Okay.
And where, again, I'm certain there are going to be some advantages and disadvantages on both sides. And no system is ever perfect to inclusively, capture 4,200 students, but to know what those are ahead of time, I think would be very important.
Just re-examining that why, okay.
And Dawn, are you asking for maybe a broader population than what Brian's pointing us to? And Brian, I know you had mentioned that. I have it on my list for this week and didn't go back to it yet, but to listen to that, was it 1 or 2 course teams?
2 course teams.
2 course teams, so 2 out of 30. I think Dawn's point, is help me understand these other 28. And I know you guys have a nice cross-section. I was frankly surprised that there's some math courses already in A to F. I thought, gosh, me being a numbers person, it's hard for me to understand A through F, but really, how does it work in math? So not to pick on that group, but I think she's saying, of the 30 teams, maybe 28 of them are super stoked about where it's going and here's all the benefits, but maybe 2 are really struggling or said, gosh, it's not working for my subject matter, or we tried to reinvent this. Like, we'd like to hear some of that balanced feedback, assuming there's some puts and takes, but then to understand your perspective, because nothing's going to be 100% A+ rock star, right? But, is there enough positive momentum? Is there enough demonstration that this is, I think, as you said, Dawn, in the best interest of students? I think that helps us with our education process to see, we do have some data, or some, not test cases, I don't mean to say that, but some courses going through this process, and there's things to learn, and you all probably know a lot of what the pros and cons have been, just kind of boiling it up, or bringing it down, or distilling it to our level for some communication, I think will help us continue to become more informed as to the merits. Or maybe there's one element of it that's a theme that it's still A through F, but we think we need to tweak this one aspect, and it'll be better for students because of that. I think, how's that, Dawn?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yep.
so.
Ironically, I got an email today that was forwarded that Glenbard West has gone to A to F implementation as well, or I think the Glenbard district is. And I just thought it was interesting too, because to that point about looking at the schools, that they've done that exercise and evaluated. I didn't do too much digging, I just happened to come across it. But they're implementing A through F, I think, system-wide in the fall. So I thought it was just kind of interesting, worth maybe doing a little bit of digging to see, because they went through the exercise of vetting their top 20 schools, the colleges, and things like that. And
It's going to be really interesting to see that, because I think being in that college tour search thing now, again, after doing it twice before, with so many universities and colleges pulling the tests and making them test optional. I mean, they had to do that because of the pandemic, but they didn't all, and they will admit to you that they didn't really all do that, having a concrete plan about how it's going to work. And some of the schools that are using it for, I mentioned University of Iowa, Mizzou, they're still using it for scholarships, and they're still using it as part of their application process. And some of the schools, the admission counselors are saying the pluses and the minuses are helping us catch the kids on the margins. And we want those kids to be caught on the margins, And they're saying, we need this extra piece of information more now than probably ever before. So it's going to be really interesting to hear that feedback.
I'd be curious. Okay. Then we will see this on Monday night for the 3-course workshops.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, we have one more item for you, Mr. Eckerding. The 2022-23 amended school calendar is your favorite, right?
I know, right? We haven't talked too much calendar this year.
It's
We
been-
sort of
yeah,
lumped
it's been
it
a
all together
while.
for today.
Right.
As we look at the school calendar for the next year and look at some things that we've seen this year, and also plan ahead for a unique day, November 8th of 2022, which will be an election day where schools are not allowed to be in session. All those things sort of combined and looking at some limitations and challenges we've had this year, the biggest one being on our late start days with our bus company, being unable to get kids here on time. Every single Wednesday, we either have some students arriving 20 to even 30 minutes late, or not being able to take a late bus and having to get here at the normal 7:30 time, because the bus company said right off the bat they couldn't get kids here. By making that shift, so I'll kind of go through that one first. By making that shift to late starts at 9:15, we lose a few minutes off of the days on those Wednesdays, but it ensures that all students are there. So right now, first period is really a mix as to what can be accomplished on those Wednesdays. That does allow a couple of things. Another thing we've been hearing from the faculty, and something we've been looking at with our professional learning, is the time for PLCs to have those meetings. And what that would do would give all of our PLCs an extra half hour every Wednesday to meet. That would do a number of things. It would allow some teams to obviously meet for a half hour longer. We have some teachers who are on as many as 3 or 4 teams. Possibly they could then meet in 2 different teams. And then we also have the challenge of some people who commute not being able to meet in person with their teams. That's, again, things that could be done. So we see that as, making lemonade out of lemons to some degree, but it is an opportunity really for us to look at more time for teachers to meet in those teaching teams, which has always been a request and continues to be a request. One of the things we also looked at in particular is our early dismissal days. Prior to the pandemic, we had 4 of those a year, and an early dismissal is officially the state calls it a school improvement day. You can bank your time if you go over the minimum amount of minutes per day, which we do every single day, even on our late start days. And then you can have an early dismissal, which essentially means students leave before lunch and teachers can meet in groups. Those have typically been division department meeting times, and again, we haven't had those now for a number of years. We've been squeezing that into the Institute Day time, which also means we have less time for professional development on Institute Day time. So we'd like to bring back those early dismissals. We're going to leave them on that Wednesday, so we're only really messing up one day. And so on those days, the students will get out a little earlier, and on the days when we have late starts, it's a little longer. So the minutes are not a significant impact on the other 4 days of the week. And that'll give some dedicated time for departments and divisions. The other piece has to do, which is at the top of the memo, which is those 176 days. So if you look at that sample calendar on page 58, for our August month, in years past, we've started, when we've started in the middle of the week, we usually start with an Institute Day on that Thursday and a work day on Friday with the first day of school on Monday. Because of that election day, we need to gain a teacher work day, and so we would add that at the beginning. A lot of times teachers have said at the beginning of the school year they would love to have another day where they can get prepared. We could get our back-to-school stuff together. They could have a little more time. What that impinges on is usually that Wednesday has been our freshman experience day, but we've also had a challenge of getting staff able to work it. So in this case, we would have that freshman experience day with staff on campus. We would most likely move that freshman experience day to that Friday, so it's a little closer to the start of school as well, so those who are traveling can make it back in time. And will give us more opportunities to spread out some of that class work time for teachers where they're actually getting paid to do that work. So we see that as a benefit there as well. The other little thing, we normally have an Institute Day in March. By losing that election day, we want to give back that student day. So we're going to give up that Institute Day again for a couple reasons. I've just outlined a whole lot of additional time for teachers at Institute Days that exist in early dismissals, in late starts. So we feel that by doing that, we can gain back that extra teacher day, or that extra student day. And since the teachers would be here anyway, it's not an additional day for them. Those are the real big changes. Again, this is always something tricky just to look at all the different pieces. We've also had some challenges in getting, this year we had, and Leslie, correct me if I'm wrong, 75 additional IEP extended testing students.
Somewhere around that number. It's inclusive of both students with IEPs as well as 504 plans requesting and approved for accommodations through College Board on the entire suite of tests.
And that means they often need to be one-on-one or in small groups with different timing codes, with different expectations. It's extremely difficult to try to do that because it always takes more than one day with every student in the building as well. So it's not that we're just having 75, it's 75 additional from previous years. So what we're looking at then is on that second day of testing in March, on the 16th, that would become an asynchronous day for students, and those students then who are doing their day 2 testing would have the ability to have the conditions right. Bells won't be ringing, there won't be passing periods going on, all that sort of stuff. So many schools have gone in that direction, and we feel that's the right way to go, especially when you look at South Campus. We have a number of kids who need those supports, and we do the PSAT 9 and 10 there. So, and for many students, that PSAT 9 is the first time they have those supports, and really it's an opportunity for them to learn if those are necessary, if those actually fit what they need. So again, we want to make sure we provide that time. And then we're also going to change how we do the Illinois Science Assessment. That's a little bit about the February date. I'm sorry, the March date. April is, sorry, April 12th and 13th, sorry.
Okay, I was going to ask.
April 12th is the SAT, the 13th would be the second day. The March 15th would be the Illinois Science Assessment. So every junior has to take that, and it took us 3 weeks to get every junior to take that this year. So that's 3 weeks of interruptions of classes, which is, it's not ideal. So we're do 1 day of interruptions. So lots of little things that we're trying to accomplish, but really the overall theme is more time for teachers and teacher preparation and teacher support, and more time in the classroom for students with that giving back of that Institute Day, but also more support in those testing environments where it's become quite challenging.
The one question I have is the reinstatement of the early dismissal days. Are those days still considered part of the 176 days?
Correct.
So is it that as long as students come and attend a certain period of time, it's considered a full day, even though it's just
Correct.
a half a day of
Yeah.
instruction?
And by getting out around 11:30, then we don't provide a lunch. We do always provide something, though, for our students who are on free and reduced lunch, but it's not, that's always the challenge, is getting 4,000 students to eat. It takes every bit of 2 hours. And so whenever you can take that component out, we can then, make some adjustments in other areas.
So big picture, no change to the first day of school, no change to the last day of school, no change to winter break or spring break.
Right?
I checked those first.
Right. All the things that matter.
Yeah. And then if students are starting on Wednesdays, right now, again, we love late start in our house, so 8:45 instead of 7:45, it's the best day of the week. We're actually going to 9:15
Correct.
instead of 8:45.
Correct.
And then we finish at the same time. So how, I didn't do the math in my head, but how many minutes long is each class
It
now?
becomes
and they're
5
lo-
minutes
they're lo-
shorter.
5 minutes shorter,
Yeah, it's
okay.
5 minutes shorter.
Okay. And we feel comfortable that that's
Yeah,
effective.
here's the challenge. It will be difficult to do a lab on those days. It'll be difficult in our PE classes to change and get all the way out to Westfield or out to, the softball fields, that sort of thing, get south. That being said, it would be good. They have been using those days for SEL lessons anyway in PE. So I think people can certainly make those adjustments, and that'll give, it's always a challenge because the 4th and 5th, I just talked about lunches on the early dismissals, they're never shortened on late
Right,
starts.
right.
So to some degree, that does mean every kid will have that study hall that they need, that they're always having, and the support that they need. That won't ever be shortened. But for teachers who teach like 1st, 2nd, and 5th, how do you
Sure.
balance, something that's, it ends up being about 15 minutes shorter of a regular period. So that's the big challenge.
Yeah, I really appreciate the response, though. I hadn't realized that there's, I'd heard about busing issues in the beginning of the year, but didn't know there's still kids who are just missing content every Wednesday. So to put an equity lens on it, I think that was a very wise move, and appreciate that context there, so.
I guess the only other question I have, is, we often hear, and often hear from you all and from teachers as well, the concern over not having enough professional development time or not having enough institute days to go through some of these initiatives. And by removing one of, I hear you saying that there's freed up time on the institute days. Did I say initiative days? Institute days?
Right.
Because of the Wednesday start at 9:15. But that still just leaves 2 institute days for next year then, correct?
We have August, October, and January.
So 3, where there's
So it'd be
normally
3.
4.
And then we have the 4 departmental meetings in the afternoon on those early dismissal days, and then the extra roughly half hour on the other late starts.
So just with the 3 institute days versus 4, and given the initiatives and the things underway and so much of what we've talked about this year, plus the outgrowth out of the new strategic plan, 3 seems like a doable amount?
It does, and honestly, when the election day is over, you'll see in the 23-24 calendar, we'll bring back that spring Institute Day. What we've done with that Institute Day is we have given that over to divisions to partner with other schools in the DuPage County area. So that's the DuPage Countywide Institute Day is what we've aligned ourselves to. So that gave us an opportunity, for example, to do an equity workshop with students all across DuPage County along with our own students and teachers. It gave us an opportunity for our math teachers to meet with other math teachers from Naperville, from Downers, those things. So that was a benefit this year. So it hasn't been so much district-directed professional learning at that one, but people really found it beneficial to get out and sort of see what other schools are doing. So that would definitely come back in after this election year decision. But for this year, as looking at all of the different, I don't know, it's not really accommodations, but all the different challenges to our calendar, we felt that was the one that we could let go of the most.
And I would just add, we've had some conversation, and we're excited about that extra half hour, adding that on every Wednesday. That gives us a little bit of flexibility to facilitate some professional learning opportunities during that time as well. So we'll have longer PLC time for our teachers, but we'll also have some flexibility to run some more formal professional development during that time, which is really exciting.
I was going to ask about that because I know it's listed here in the documentation about the extra 30 minutes for professional development effort. So I think that'll be real helpful. And that probably is considerably more than they're getting now.
Right, and a lot of the things we offer during planning periods, which if you don't have 5 preps in a commute is awesome. Or if, depending on where that lands, and if you're not doing a 6th assignment, if you're not doing extra duty. So a lot of times teachers have had to choose between the professional learning that's available on those days or their planning time. And so this would give them, again, the dedicated time to do some of those things.
Sure hope so, yeah.
So moving into this year, we actually doubled the time by moving to early dismissal every Wednesday, right? Versus it was just every other Wednesday on most months.
Yeah, right, for the late starts,
So
yep.
we doubled it, and then now this year, or for next year, it's an additional 30 minutes. That's quite an increase, and I think it's important to note that, because, you know, we all do realize how much the teachers need the professional development time and the time to meet with their teams and so forth. So, I mean, that's a really positive, big change, I'd say.
And from what we gather, the students will enjoy it as well.
Oh, there's
Yeah,
no question.
that's
The students
true.
will be uproarious, especially the
On Wednesday.
seniors.
Yeah, right. So true. Okay, any other questions? Excellent. Okay, so we'll see that on Monday. I guess we can now move on to student services. We've been waiting for this.
Let me plug in
Leslie
and hope
Owens,
that.
overview of the special ed services.
Hopefully that will come up. Perfect. Thank you, President Dillon. I'm really excited about this presentation as a former member of the Special Education Leadership Team. We've got the whole leadership team here to present. Just by way of introduction on the topic, the board had asked for some general information about our delivery of special education services here at LT, and so the leadership team has put that together to give you an overview of the way that students are provided service, all the different ways within special education. I won't read through the whole memo, but just something to point out is that, and we kind of touched on this in our conversation a bit ago, but just that, you know, federal law and evidence-based practices guide us to ensure that students are only receiving the amount of special education that they need. They should be put into the least restrictive environment is what it's called officially, meaning you are with your general education peers wherever possible. And so as we've talked this year, as you all know, we are introducing co-teaching next year, so that will be an additional service delivery that's added to the continuum of services that you hear about, and that's a really significant way for us to increase that least restrictive environment for students and get our students into general education classes where appropriate and really continue focusing on those rigorous instructional standards for all students so that they are very successful when they leave LT, not just getting that graduation, but also beyond and making sure that they reach their goals. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Melissa Moore, who is the division chair for special education. She'll have the rest of the members introduce themselves, and they will be presenting.
Thank you, Mrs. Owens. Good evening. Thank you for providing our team the opportunity to provide you an overview of special education programming at Lyons Township High School. As Mrs. Owens mentioned, my name is Melissa Moore, and I'm honored to be the division chair for special education here at LT. Each of the members of our team will introduce themselves and their role in the division as they present to you this evening. All right, we can go ahead to the next slide. To set the stage for the information that we will share about our programming, we first wanted to share background as to how students are identified for special education. If there's suspicion that a student may have a disability that warrants special education services, either the school team or a parent may refer that student for further evaluation. With parental consent, a multidisciplinary team conducts that evaluation and uses the data collected to determine that a student has a disability that meets federally established criteria, that disability adversely impacts the student's educational performance, and that the student requires specialized instructions. So all three of those criteria listed on the slide must be met in order for a student to be eligible for special education. For context, last year's state report card reflected that approximately 11% of LT students qualified for special education, and that compares with 15% as the state average. Can move to the next slide. All right. So after a student qualifies for special education and the parent consents to services, so you'll hear that the parent is really an important member in terms of not only decision-making, but also consent every step of the way through the process. The multidisciplinary team develops an individualized educational plan, or an IEP, for the student. That plan is updated at least annually and includes each of the following components that you see on the slide. So the first is information about the student's current academic and functional performance, including strengths and areas of deficit. A transition plan that describes the student's post-secondary goals in the areas of employment, training or education, and independent living, as well as supports to work toward those goals. Annual goals to measure progress in the areas of identified need. Necessary educational accommodations to support the students in the classroom setting and standardized assessments, And then finally, the necessary services and educational environment to help the student make progress toward those identified goals. So the last component, the services and placement component, will be the focus of the remainder of our presentation. As Mrs. Owens stated, the IEP team is charged with identifying the least restrictive environment, or the environment with the greatest access to non-disabled peers, that will provide the student with access to the necessary supports and services as outlined in that student's IEP. The continuum of placements or services includes, on the least restrictive end, the general education setting, either with or without supports. More restrictive than that is a self-contained setting, which includes classes that are restricted only to special education students. And then the most restrictive end of that continuum would include placements outside of LT or outside of the home school is what we call it. The approval of co-teaching by this board provides one additional step in our continuum, which is special education instruction, which is provided within the general education environment. So we're very excited about that. You will see the placement continuum represented as a pyramid in the corner of each of the slides as our team members present all of the different programming that we offer, with the least restrictive placements highlighted as the bottom of the pyramid, and then more restrictive placements are highlighted further along on the pyramid. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dan Singer. I'm a program coordinator of cross-categorical programs at South Campus and our inclusion program district-wide. Before we jump into the pyramid, I'd like to talk about some of the parts of our components of our district division services for special education. Every student who has an IEP is assigned a case manager. This individual works within the special education division, serves a number of different important roles for that student. They serve as a key communicator between students' needs and their teachers, as well as function as a point of communication for the families. Additionally, they monitor individual student IEP goals to make sure that they're making progress in their areas of deficit, as well as serve as a really important function as an expert on that student. They know that student's needs, they know that student's strengths, as well as where they're headed, that transition plan that we were talking about earlier. Additionally, I'd like to think that our case managers are our students' strongest advocates. They're the ones that are going to be trying to ensure that student is reaching their objectives and meeting their goals. Some of our students have intensive needs that require a lot of coordination between different providers, complicated accommodations, and paraeducator needs. And so in those instances, we have inclusion facilitators that help do that intensive coordination and do their best to support our students within the general education environment during the school day. Here is kind of a laundry list of some of the other professionals that work with our students with disabilities, our related service providers. They may be provided within a pull-out or a push-in delivery model. And we partner with 2 special education cooperatives, our local LaGrange Area Department of Special Education and the Cooperative Association of Special Education, we just call them CASE, of DuPage. And they provide a variety of different specialized related services for our students. And so they include, not limited to, social work services, psychological services, speech language services, physical therapy, occupational therapy, vision and hearing itinerant services, orientation, mobility, and in special education transportation. So that's kind of rounds out. I just like to say that they're all fantastic professionals that do great things for our kids. So.
Good evening. Thanks for having us here. I'm Allison Doyle. I'm the Assistant Division Chair in Special Education. So I'm going to talk about our least intensive curricular level of support as we're going through the pyramid, which is our resource level of support. Approximately 50% of our students in special education that are receiving minutes are enrolled in a resource level class. We offer 4 of those classes. When students take that, there's always a conversation at the table about, well, I'm not going to get 2 electives, because it does take the place of an elective. but we're still able to get another elective in there. Students do get a half credit of a general elective credit towards graduation. So they require 5.5 of those credits, and so each year if somebody takes it for 4 years, that's 4 of those 5.5. So we broke it down, and the first 2 are base 1 and base 2. So what that stands for is building academic success, skills for effectiveness, sorry. And ultimately, we adopted the Rush Neurobehavioral Center's curriculum for executive functions, and it's fantastic. We've taken that curriculum, tweaked it to include IEP awareness, and add in just what we see students at LT need to be successful, we build into that class. So base 1 is offered, it is an IEP team recommendation for freshmen only, which has been nice because all freshmen take world history, all freshmen take English 1, so they're able to talk about those in that setting and be able to be like, okay, I've got so-and-so for this class, what was that assignment, and they're able to talk in there. Base 2 is offered for sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And again, that's for students who need that explicit direct instruction in those executive functioning skills. The time management, the self-advocacy, really just those skills for success that we know that students need. Then we also have ARC, which is the Academic Resource Center. And that is for students who really have those skills, the executive functioning skills. They just need a check-in every day. They need to be in a classroom with a special education teacher, with paraeducator support, to really hone in on those self-advocacy skills and be as prepared as possible for whatever their post-secondary outcomes are. Within that, where's I going with that? Oh, this is the level of support that we would think that students might see at a post-secondary education, where they're going and they can go to a check-in. They can go into some sort of like a drop-in center for students in college. And then we have our PSD resource, which is our personal and social development that Aaron Sharkey is going to talk a little bit more. And that is a resource for students who need more of that social emotional supports, as well as the self-advocacy and really honing in on those skills. But Aaron's going to talk a lot more about that one. So thank you. It's really hot in here, sorry.
Very hot. It is warm. It's usually cold.
Yes. Hello, I'm Erin Sharkey. I'm the program coordinator for PSD, as Allison said, and the North Campus cross-categorical programs. And I will speak about both of these programs tonight. Cross-categorical classes are available across content areas for students with identified needs in reading, math, written expression, or significant executive functioning needs, and include all the classes noted on the slide, content area classes like English, math, world history, etc. Approximately 30% of students in special education receive instruction through the cross-categorical program. Classes are staffed by a certified special education teacher, and typically a paraeducator is also included in the class. The classes are capped at 13 students maximum. The cross-categorical curriculum is based on a modified prep-level curriculum with instruction tailored to students' individualized IEP goals. The PSD curriculum stands for Personal and Social Development and is offered to students with identified social emotional needs. The PSD program services approximately 15% of special education students across North and South campuses. The PSD teachers are each certified special education teachers, and typically a classroom paraeducator is also included in the classes. PSD classes include many content area classes, such as English, math, geometry, world history, and US history, along with PSD resource. And these classes are aligned to grade level curriculum. These courses offer students instruction in an emotionally supportive environment and typically focus on self-advocacy, self-image, social adjustment, and developing future plans. Students in the PSD program have access to grade level social workers to meet their social work minutes. Thank you.
Hello, thanks again for having us. My name is Kate Wagamuth. I'm a special education program coordinator at LT. I work in our LIFE program. I also have a key role with our paraeducators, both professional development and scheduling on a daily basis. So our life courses, so our self-contained courses as well, also have a maximum of 13 students. And are really for our students with more moderate to severe disabilities. At LT, currently, we have about 7% of our special education students that are serviced within at least one life program course. So when we look at our courses for life programming, we're looking at foundational academic skills and functional skills. And so when we're looking to kind of consider whether a student is appropriate for a life program class, some of the key pieces we're looking at are cognitive functioning, functional skills overall, level of independence, transition outcomes, and eligibility for alternative state assessment. Then there are some courses listed above that are our courses in the life program. Each of those equate to a graduation requirement course. So for example, our life and work skills course that will take care of a student's social studies requirement for all 4 years, as well as science requirement, obviously for two of those years. Life social skills and life reading are both electives as well as home living, which will count towards elective credits. Within our life program, we also, there's a high level of individualization, right? So we also have subdivided sections within the life program, and then when we're looking at a student and kind of determining which subdivided section is most appropriate, the considerations that we give are to academic level, communication, motor functioning, functional behavior, and daily living skills. And obviously these are IEP team decisions, including parents. And then also at LT, we have our transition program. I'm not the program coordinator for transition this year. That's Allison Doyle. I had been previously for the past 4 years. So the transition program is a service that's available for students who require additional instruction or support, specialized instruction from, or support after they graduate from high school. They've met their graduation requirements. So what they're working on once they're in transition is they end up receiving post-secondary goals that they're working on, okay? So they've met their graduation requirements, they walk the stage, and they receive a certificate of completion until they're ready to exit from LT, at which point they do receive their diploma. So students, currently we have 12% of our 12th grade students that are recommended roughly each year for transition programming after they complete their graduation requirements. This is including students that are recommended on both a part-time and full-time basis. So that's a unique piece of information about our transition program. It could be a part-time or a full-time basis. Students within our transition program, our curricular focus, they're listed above. So workplace training or vocational training, we have community participation, transportation and other related services, and then independent living. So when we're looking at whether or not a student is part-time or full-time in the transition program, we're really looking at what area of specialized instruction do they need, and do they have goals in all 4 areas, 1 area, and then that leads the discussion in regards to if a student is recommended for part-time or full-time in our transition program. When we're looking also at students and when they exit from our transition program, so obviously the state of Illinois recently changed the bill, and now students can remain in our transition program until the end of the school year in which they turn 22. Previous, it was the day before your 22nd birthday. However, when students are in our transition program, it's not you're in our program and you're here and you're part-time or full-time until that time. We're really continually assessing their goals, right? And so when they've met their annual goals is at the time that the IEP team would discuss dismissing or exiting, and at that time they'd receive their LT diploma.
To add to Kate's, we do have 22 students who are going to be taking their diploma and exiting transition, so we're going to be recognizing them up here on the stage this Thursday, so we're really excited to move on those 22 students to their next steps in their life. So the last placement, the most restrictive that we'll talk about, is when students are unable to find success here at LT, and we do need to look at alternative placements. So ultimately, it's based on the students, the intensity and the severity of their needs. We try all of our programmings. We try and put as much support in place, and sometimes it's just not the right fit. So that's when we're looking at our most common would be our therapeutic day schools, which right now, of all students in special education, about 1% of students end up going to an alternative placement. So, and then within that, we just have to say that that's pulling students away from their general education peers. They're not unable to access their peers during the day, and then they would only have opportunities before, after school, or they can participate in all of our activities, proms, things like that, but they are not here for the school day. So, all right, this concludes our presentation. Any
Thank
questions
you.
for any of us?
Wow, that's a lot. Thank you.
It's a lot of information, so certainly if you have any questions or need clarification on any, please fire away.
First of all, thank you so much for giving us just a quick understanding of the different programs and everything. This is really super helpful for us, and I really appreciate the information. One question about the transition program. You said that 12% of the students are offered the transition program? Recommended for. And is that, are some students looking to try to get into the transition and aren't able to, or how does that work?
So I think at the end of high school, right, you're graduating, and there are obviously questions on both parts of general education students as well as special education students. So I do think the discussions around who's recommended for transition. So there are still deficits related to disability, and there are still annual goals that specialize, that require specialized instruction. I think that's the biggest piece from a special education teacher.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the distinctions is that it's not just a program that's offered to all, and if you elect, you can go into the program. It's an assessment piece by the IEP team as to whether or not you require that continued specialized instruction and support. Being in a transition program, while we're so proud of our transition program, they do amazing work with our students. It's also postponing your ability to start your life, if you will, after high school. Some students absolutely need that to increase their independence, to have the job skills necessary to get and hold a job, to live independently or as independently as possible. But if you don't need that support, we would not want to keep you, as much as we love you, we don't want to keep you here in high school without that need. So it's a little bit of a difference. It's not just a program that we would offer. I think any student as a senior would say, yeah, I'll stay on for another little bit and get ready for my post-secondary plans. So that's really the distinction, which is why the IEP team with the parent and the student and all of those related service team members are making that decision together to determine that the student requires continued service. And again, back to Kate's point about not every student automatically stays until the end of that year when they turn 22, because there may be students who after a year in transition are ready. They have a job, they know their transportation plan, they're living independently, so there's no need for us to, again, we'd love to hang on to them, but we know they're ready to move on. So it's a much more fluid program, I would say, than our other programs, because they're adults, because they're ready for that step.
Yeah, Allison just said it's great, and it truly is great. I just like to say first, thank you all for coming and sharing this, the great work that you're doing, the extensive and robust program that we have here for our students who have these needs. I also want to just say a huge thanks. I don't even know the words to say, but for really during the COVID days when the schools were closed, for really getting our special education students back into school first and giving them those needs. I remember being able to meet those needs as quickly as possible. I think that was just tremendous and heartening, and I really, really appreciate that. I guess, other than just wanting to say thank you and how much I appreciate the information, the only real question I have is where is the co-teaching model basically going to be implemented to any of these areas, like the resource classes that we heard of, or are we going to find the co-teachers in the general education classes, whereby we can maybe move some of those students that may have otherwise taken a class into a general education course because there's the co-teacher there?
The resource classes are sort of separate. That might be something additional that a student would need regardless if they were in a co-taught class or a cross-categorical class. So that will be, again, the IEP team decision. Obviously, what we're looking to do with those co-taught classes is that when students have a disability in reading comprehension or down the road when we get into having math and science classes, all of the areas, reading, writing, and math, those skills, we're able to, when they're getting close to or approximating grade level, but they still need some support, we can now provide service, that specially designed instruction, with a gen ed teacher and a special education teacher within the same classroom. So it helps prepare our students to hopefully get that experience, get what they need to get to grade level, and then move on to prep level classes or beyond. The resource class would be something that obviously will come into play whether or not the student continues to need that additional class and that support, but that'll be individually decided upon. Did that answer?
It does, but I think I understand where my confusion was, because you've introduced us to a whole nother layer of acronyms, and education is so full of acronyms anyway. So I heard you say that the PSD courses are structured on a college prep curriculum. I guess I'm just wondering, like, where those, without the co-teaching model, where are those kids, where are we going to see some movement from the structure that's in place into those classes that are going to be co-teaching? Where are those kids coming from? Are they coming from the PSD?
Most of the students will be coming from our cross-categorical classes for students with learning disabilities. The PSD program, again, is specialized for students who have emotional disabilities. That doesn't mean that we couldn't have students co-taught. However, most of them will come from that cross-categorical level. So seeing that we have a lot of students that are, again, approximating grade level, but are just still need some specially designed instruction rather than having them in a self-contained class. Now we'll have that option of having them in a co-taught class.
And I wrote it down correctly in my notes, just I can't get all the jargon together, but I get it now. The PSD is at grade level, and I understand that, and then the PSD is at the prep levels that are
For the academic portion, yes. Yes, it's still taught by a special education teacher, but it's the focus of their specially designed instruction is on that emotional disability rather than modifying any of the academic
That's
parts of
excellent.
that.
And I'll have to sit with all this jargon for a little while, as you can tell.
We provided a dictionary. It might be about 200 pages long and a lot to get through.
And so for the alternative program, do students have to first go to, are they able to go right into an alternative placement, like from 8th grade, or do they have to go through the services here at LT, and then it's determined at that point that an alternative placement is needed?
You guys want to? I'm happy to answer, but. Go ahead, Allison. You're in that world right now.
So ultimately, the IEP, we all sat through all of our 8th grade transition meetings, and at that time, if the student is already outplaced at an alternative placement from the 8th grade team, we will work with whatever the final plan is, and whether that's transitioning the student back to one of our feeder schools prior to them coming here, or sometimes we'll have them stay at their placement if it is goes through high school, and then the IEP team is constantly looking, is that student ready to transition back to mainstreaming back onto our campus? So I didn't answer that as direct as possible, but it's really all about the IEP team decision and what the recommendation is.
I would add too that the path there is very individualized, and I'm sorry, I know that's always the answer we come back to, but we have students who might have something happen in their lives and something, happen related to their disability that they need a placement in an alternative setting quicker than another student might. And so we're always looking at what is that least restrictive environment, making sure that we're considering and not jumping too quickly. We certainly want to always make sure that we've exhausted all of the supports that we have available here at LT before looking at an alternative placement. But how a student gets there might vary depending on the student's needs.
To complicate things even more, I think it's a little bit different when we're looking at students with emotional disabilities versus students with like cognitive disabilities or multi-needs classrooms. Just because our feeder districts don't typically have in-house multi-need rooms, and we do. So there's a higher percentage of students that we bring back, I would say, in-house when we're looking at more of those functional, academic, and independent skills.
So many students that are in our life program, if they were in another district, would need to go to an alternative placement because they wouldn't have enough staff, enough support, space, all of those things needed to serve those students. So we're really fortunate in our district to be able to include those students in our school programming rather than having to send them to an alternative placement.
Thank you.
I'll also say thank you. I mean, I thought I knew some things about the topic, and you certainly have raised my awareness, and it sounds, and so thank you for all the effort, and I think it's an incredibly talented team doing extremely important work that I think a lot of folks don't always hear much about. So if there's ways we can continue to educate, I feel like I received an education tonight, and if there's ways to continue to educate our broader community, I think it'll make us more aware and just kind of raise the bar. Sounds like a very high touch, individualized topic. There may be some mini themes, but and you know, to your questions earlier, Jill, I think some kids, like sometimes the goal is to reintegrate or to reduce the amount of support, and then others it's to continue to provide support that they need. It's just, I don't know, mind-blowing to me, and I appreciate all that you do. I can't even begin to imagine the complicated nature of as you mentioned, talking with all the eighth graders as they're coming in, and again, everyone's got a different story and to craft the path. And thanks for highlighting how LT is differentiated with some of the services we're able to offer. I think it's all great. Can you remind me, again, lots of words, lots of acronyms. This is all about IEP, et cetera. There's also 504 plans there's a whole nother subset of our, maybe with some overlap, but I can't remember if it's either or.
It's like another meeting, I think, of fun.
I'm not trying to go into another, long thing on it, but
You might be here till like 2 o'clock.
504s are outside of this team, and it's the counselors that are more the point of contact?
They're the point
Okay.
of contact. It's two separate, laws that govern, and a real quick and easy way to differentiate is that usually with IEP, with special education, the student requires some sort of specialized instruction.
Okay.
Whereas with the 504 plan, for the most part, students need accommodations in order to access the curriculum. So that's a really general way of differentiating. There are some nuances there, but we can certainly talk about those later.
Oh, no, thank you.
I would just say thank you for the presentation, and as someone that's familiar with it, I think it would be maybe really helpful. I don't know if it's possible to do. I think Dan Singer has some mad skills, though, and can do some stuff. But maybe to do like a generic, what an IEP looks like. Sure. I think that might be really helpful for the board. I mean, just as a generic, Jane Doe type of
Kind of what the
student.
template looks like for the documents.
I mean,
Sure.
something like that. I think that might be really helpful, because if you've never seen it, to really understand what are the components of it, I think that might be helpful.
Good idea.
Yeah. On average, I'd say an IEP in a high school is, 30 pages long. So just thinking about that, all the decisions you go through in those 30 pages to make sure students have what they need, it's definitely overwhelming, and it's hard to conceptualize when you haven't seen it. There are some state forms, and we have forms that are just general without any information, so I'd be happy to share those just for, for you
I don't know
guys
if
to
you could
view.
do like a generic, just something I think to understand it, I think.
Yeah, it gives a tangibility and kind of helps give context to how we understand that and how it all.
Right, it's not just one page.
Right.
It's so much that goes into it with your
Right.
goals and everything, because I don't know
Yeah.
in this, for someone that's familiar with it from, a personal standpoint, that in here, I think, some of it's missing for all of you, there's the goals, and what does that look like? I would just think that might help you all to have that information.
And the meeting with if it's an annual touch point with the parents, you talked a lot about parental support or, and involvement, and just to kind of round out. Sounds good.
And then a breakdown of the acronyms.
And then maybe
Like a
also,
glossary key.
the other thing that I
They
would
keep
say.
changing, that's the problem.
Right, true.
Maybe and what are the 13 different categories?
Sure.
I think might also be helpful to understand, because for all of you, maybe even.
Yeah, we can absolutely pull that information together. We've got,
Oh, yeah.
Dan, I think you were elected.
Sorry, Dan.
Get to turn the arrow.
Leslie, just two more mini questions. social work on here, on the related services and examples of who you partner with. We have two social, I just want to check in, we have two social workers?
We have, so
Or
we
is
have
this
our
a
grade
separate?
level social workers. We have, Nakia Wilson is a dedicated special education social worker, and she works primarily with students in the life and transition programs. There's also a service called WRAP Social Work Services that we purchase service through LADSI for students who need a really intensive kind of wrap around social work experience where that social worker is working with family on some family training. But our grade level social workers are responsible for meeting the minutes in students' IEPs. So that's a primary function of a school social worker, is to not only, see our general education students who come in with needs, but also to provide the supports that are documented in the minutes. So our social workers go to the IEPs where they're listed as a service and provide those supports. For life and transition students, some of those social work supports can look really specialized, as well as some of our PSD students. So those are all decisions made at the IEP team table about what that's going to look like and who will be providing those.
And then the second one, is it rare that students come to us from our feeder districts, so they've been part of our community system, so to speak? Is it rare that they come to us and then they are identified here as needing an IEP?
Fairly rare. It ebbs and flows. We've had years, and I can't speak to this year's numbers or last year's numbers as well, but when I was part of the team, we had years that were, for whatever reason, we had a really high initial referral rate of like, a really high year would be 45 students referred for special education. Some years it's much lower. I would say most frequently when a student is entering LT without an IEP, the most frequent referral within high school is for an emotional disability, something more social and emotionally based. Typically, a learning disability or some sort of learning need is identified much, much, much sooner within elementary school.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great, thank you guys. That was really, really comprehensive and really appreciative. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think we have one more item under student services, the Illinois State Board of Education disciplinary report. Leslie Owens.
That's me. Thank you, President Dillon. So on page 66 of the packet, we have the Illinois State Board of Education Discipline Improvement Plan. So I'm going to walk us through that just to give a little context about where this plan is coming from, why we have to submit this plan, and the metrics that the state is looking at. Exclusionary discipline, there's been a lot of research done over the past decades about the ineffectiveness of exclusionary discipline. And when we're talking about exclusionary discipline, we're really talking about expulsions and suspensions. And so back in 2016, Illinois was actually at the forefront with Senate Bill 100 of really targeting to reduce the number of out-of-school suspensions and expulsions in order to provide a lot more supports. A huge piece of that was that students of color and students with disabilities were disproportionately being suspended and excluded from school. And so taking a look at that, understanding that without the education piece, without the support piece, those exclusionary discipline policies and practices were not affecting change in behavior as you would hope. And so it kind of reset everybody's mindset on that exclusionary discipline. Based on that, the state of Illinois looked at creating a goal for the entire state and all of our districts to reduce our out-of-school suspensions and expulsions. And so the goal is that, the Illinois State Board of Education will support district implementation of policy and guidance to promote student safety and well-being, including non-discrimination and inclusion. And so by the end of the 21-22 school year, they are looking for a 5% reduction in suspensions and expulsions of students of color. By the end of the 22-23 school year, they want an additional 5 percentage point reduction in those suspensions and expulsions of students of color. So they're looking at that as the overarching goal, and then giving us metrics that we are being monitored by. So the three metrics that they are looking at are across districts, all the districts in the state, are suspension rate, expulsion rate, and racial disproportionality. And so I'll walk you through. In your packet, there is a copy of the discipline improvement plan. So I'll go through those three sections and also get some help explaining our proposed plan from Dr. Waterman, Dr. Tyrell, and Dr. Rowe. But again, those three metrics, so ISB first determines which districts are eligible for each metric, and then determines of the districts eligible, who falls in that top 20%. So if you look at the, on page 68, you'll see some data, but underneath that I have included the calculations and what the eligibility criteria are for a district to even be considered within the metric. So we have 859 total districts in the state. You'll see in the data that not all of those districts are even included when you look at our rank where we are positioned. Not every district, again, is eligible for each metric. So for example, for suspension rate, there need to be eligible for even being included in that metric, there need to be 10 or more out-of-school suspensions for a given school year. They are looking at all school districts in this data, so elementary districts, high school districts, unit districts, as well as some state-approved charter schools. So that's all included. It's not differentiated by high school or elementary school. They've been monitoring this data, and it's all available on the ISB website since 2016, so that's the data that you see represented. So any district that falls within the top 20% of a metric is required to submit a discipline improvement plan, so we'll walk through that and why we are needing to submit that plan. Until you have not been in the top 20% in any metric for 3 consecutive years, you will be on the list. So until you have shown that 3 years of not being in the top 20%, the way it's written is confusing, then we will be submitting a discipline improvement plan. So again, since 2016 and the introduction of that Senate Bill 100, there's archived data on ISB that anybody can look at, and they break it down in each of those metrics. So if you look on the top of page 68, this is our data that is housed on the ISB website, and they guide you to pull data straight from there in order to write your discipline improvement plan. So you see the years are listed, whether or not we were included in the top 20%, what our rate was. Looking at the top is the suspension rate. I included the total rate range just to give some context to these numbers, and then our rank. Again, it's not going to be out of a total number of 859 districts. It's only going to be out of a total number of districts that were eligible for that metric. We were not eligible for the suspension metric in the year 2021. We did not have enough out-of-school suspensions, or we were lower than that threshold, so we were not even eligible for the metric. Our expulsion rate for all the years that are reported currently, we have not been eligible for the expulsion metric, which is 10 or more expulsions for a given school year, and that is specific to expulsions both with and without an alternative placement attached. And then looking at the racial disproportionality rate, that's the area in which we have been included in the top 20%, and the reason for why we are creating a discipline improvement plan and required to submit that to the state. So all of the years that are highlighted in yellow indicate those are years that we have been included in the top 20%. So again, the rate is listed, the total rate range, and then what our rank is as compared to all the districts that were eligible for that metric. We were not eligible for that disproportionality metric in the year 2021, so that is not included there. The calculations are listed. The racial disproportionality rate really looks at the number of white students, the total enrollment, how many white students are suspended, and then looking at the students of color, total enrollment, and how many students of color were suspended, and dividing those numbers. So on page 69, I pulled out the racial disproportionality calculations just again to provide more information, since that is the metric that has created a need for a discipline improvement plan. And then section 2 is the data analysis and identified trends, so I'll walk through those. So again, we have not been within the top 20% of any of the 3 metrics in the last year. But in order to be removed, we need to remain out of the top 20% for all metrics for a consecutive 3 years. So if all goes the way it's gone the last year, we would be removed from that list in 2023. We have not been within the top 20% of eligible districts with regard to suspension rate or expulsion rate since the beginning of this data collection in 2016. We were not eligible for the metrics of suspension rate or expulsion, suspension for 2021, expulsion 2016 through 2021. But we have been within that top 20%, like I said, of racial disproportionality in the last, or 4 of the last 6 years. So for context, again, for that number, the percentage of total enrollment of students of color for the years 2016 2016 through 2020, respectively. That number has stayed pretty even, but 27.6%, 27.2%, again, 27.2, 27.6, and 28.8. So again, that's our total percentage of students of color enrolled at LT. The percentage of the total suspensions or expulsions applied to students of color for those same years, however, you'll see that disproportionality. So 63.2% of our suspensions or expulsions were applied to students of color as compared to, in 2016 as compared to the enrollment of 27.6%. And you see those numbers going between 60 down to 46% and then back up to 60%. So our suspension rate, again, just to interpret the data a bit, was highest in 2019. Our lowest suspension was in 2021. Our overall totals of suspensions are low, but within those suspensions, that disproportionality is still placing us within the top 20% of districts in the state that are eligible for that metric. That racial disproportionality rate for us was highest in 2016 and then lowest in 2021 when we were not eligible for it, so meaning we didn't hit the threshold there. So again, based on those, all of that data, we are required by the state of Illinois to have a board-approved discipline improvement plan submitted by June 1st, and I'm gonna talk a little bit more about what our plan, how we're gonna begin that plan, and then Dr. Waterman, Dr. Tyrell, and Dr. Rowe will add some information to that in terms of what our plans are to support students, to support effective, discipline, and to make sure that we're not included within that top 20%. So the first part of our plan really includes more specific data review and analysis. So back to that concept of disaggregating our data and getting really specific about who is being suspended or expelled, when, why, all the factors involved, what demographic groups, so that we can really drill into what are the factors included and how do we intervene on those factors. We have this year, partnering with Decision Ed, we are creating our building level and district level dashboards that will allow us to view data in real time rather than waiting for lag data or reports that are completed at the end of a year, end of a semester, but being able to watch that information in real time and make sure that we're monitoring that information and intervening where necessary. Obviously, we'll use data to set those goals to make sure we stay under what we could anticipate would be the top 20% of districts. That obviously is a little bit of a moving target given that it depends on which districts are eligible. But again, just for us to set those goals and ensure that we're intervening. And then ISB provides a lot of really great evidence-based resources for districts in order to meet not only our local goals for our discipline improvement plan, but to be on track for the state to meet those, the goals of reducing the out-of-school suspensions and expulsions by 5 percentage points. And so using those guides, not only do they provide some interventions and support for how we would support students, but they also provide some really good planning documents for how a district or a building takes this task on to make sure they're planning really well and again intervening on the right, intervening at the right moments and the right points to improve our discipline data. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Waterman to talk a little bit about things from the district level.
Yeah, so a couple of other components of the plan, just the idea of increasing district capacity that's going to help us emphasize improving academic, social, emotional, and post-secondary outcomes of all students is a really big part of this. We have 2 new district level administrators in the area of student services and equity and belonging this year that will allow us to expand this work, but also just the expansion of student services personnel with the addition of a bilingual coordinator. Additional guidance counselor and social worker will also be extremely beneficial in this work. So that whole concept of increasing our capacity is really, really important in this effort and is included within the discipline improvement plan. Another area underway is we have 2 board members and myself are working with our counsel from Franzik to take a look at our policies related to student behavior. We've started back in late March with specifically on 7190 student behavior, also on 7240, which is our code of conduct, and then 720 harassment of students, and 7180, which is bullying, harassment, intimidation. And I know that that work will expand beyond just those policies. But the idea of just, from a board perspective, looking at our policies is a really important part of that, but then also increasing district capacity really at all levels to do this work. So that's that's one part of it. And I think Dr. Tyrell is going to talk about our handbook review and revision.
Great, thanks, Dr. Waterman. In addition, I'll also talk about our partnership with Rosecrans, and I just want to mention before I start, our assistant principals were a critical player in coming up with this proposal and coming up with this discipline improvement plan that we're going through tonight. They did a significant amount of work and appreciate their efforts, certainly. With respect to handbook review, we will convene a multidisciplinary committee to oversee a review and revision of the student handbook and code of conduct at the start of the 2022-2023 school year, with the goal of proposing changes that will go into effect for the start of the 23-24 school year. The overarching desired outcomes of this review and revision will be to ensure legal compliance and compliance with board policy, support students, families, and staff in order to maintain a safe school environment conducive to academic learning and personal growth by clearly outlining the behavioral expectations, interventions, and accompanying procedures. LTHS will utilize or plans to utilize the AASA, which is the School Superintendent Association, framework for revising school district codes of student conduct to guide the handbook review and revision and ensure alignment with evidence-based practice and best practices with the focus on preventative and restorative disciplinary responses. According to the AASA framework for revising school district codes of student conduct, measures can and should be taken to build positive school climates, respond to special circumstances of students, prevent student misbehavior, and address violations of school rules in a restorative manner. Model codes generally include 4 sections: introduction, rights and responsibilities, prevention, intervention and disciplinary responses, and policies and procedures. The type of content for each section would be outlined within the framework and will be used to guide our revision. So we plan to use that as kind of our model as we're putting together our framework for our handbook review and revision. Specifically within the intervention section, restorative practices would be outlined. Restorative practices have been implemented in many schools and districts as an alternative to exclusionary discipline and as a way to proactively prevent and address conflict through relationship building and mediation. A bit later, Dr. Rowe will share a bit more about our work within this area. The building leadership team anticipates making some minor changes, so on a regular basis, we review the handbook on a smaller scale and make minor adjustments going into the start of the school year. We plan to do that and make some recommendations of minor changes as we start next school year, but we'll work with members of the central leadership team to develop our framework for completing the comprehensive review over the course of the next year. And when we say we're putting together a multidisciplinary team, that might look different for each aspect or each section of the handbook, but we anticipate it being a really collaborative process with stakeholder involvement. I'm going to skip to the section on our partnership with Rosecrans. Rosecrans is a national leader in addiction and behavioral health treatment that provides individualized evidence-based treatment. Instead of an immediate out-of-school suspension and return, LTHS has contracted with Rosecrans to bring an assessment counselor on campus to work with students and families. And that is when a student is found in possession or under the influence of illegal substances. Based on the results of the assessment, students and families may opt into various treatment programs through Rosecrans and their local LaGrange office. And at times, that continued treatment happens on campus as well. In lieu of out-of-school suspension, students and families may opt into the alternative to suspension program with Rosecrans, and the goal is treatment and recovery as opposed to exclusionary discipline, which would be suspension. Services provided by Rosecrans, some on-site at LT and most at the LaGrange Rosecrans facility, include the following, and it's really an extensive list: on-site behavioral health screenings, assessments, urine drug testing, interventions, and referrals to treatment for students, referrals to appropriate treatment for behavioral health conditions to improve students' social, emotional, and academic success, delivery of ongoing case management, coordination, and communication with school staff, students, families, and other community organizations, and training, education, and consultation on behavioral health issues for school personnel, students, and parents. So to share a summary of how this looks in practice, when a student is found in possession or under the influence of an illegal substance, the assistant principal shares this option with the student and family. The assessment is completed on campus, and then based on the assessment, Rosecrans makes recommendations for additional levels of support, most of which are accessible at the LaGrange location. Contracting with Rosecrans makes this step much more convenient for students and families, and since it's much more convenient, we're seeing more students and families take advantage of this option, which is really preferred on our end because it speaks to treatment versus exclusion. Prior to contracting with Rosecrans, the onus was on the student and the parent to have that assessment completed at one of 3 partnership organizations. So now we're taking that step out of the mix and we are providing on-site assessment. Just a little bit of data that I think speaks to the power of this partnership and this opportunity. Our assistant principals started using this option in September, and to date, 33 students have opted into the alternative to suspension program with Rosecrans. And I know we're not sharing a significant amount of data with you tonight. We really have to dive in and take a look at data on a comprehensive level, as Leslie shared. But for comparison purposes, in 2018-19, there were 306 out-of-school suspension days for possession or being under the influence, and this year there have been 42 days of out-of-school suspension for possession or being under the influence. A few more in-school suspension days, but you can see a dramatic decrease because we have more students and families that are taking advantage of the alternate to suspension program, which is critical. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rowe to talk about restorative practices.
Thank you very much. So we talked a little bit about restorative practices, and I'll go a little further at this time. So our school-wide efforts for improvement include the integration and implementation of restorative practices, which is a supportive approach to community building and with discipline. And so I like what Dr. Tyrell was just speaking about with those numbers, and we can imagine as we build our restorative practices and we have greater relationships with students that hopefully those numbers also will begin to drop. So our AP office is currently using some elements of restorative practices at this time in their work, but this approach will be greatly expanded moving forward in our work here at LT. The 3 main goals of restorative justice or restorative practices are accountability, community safety, and competency development. The restorative approach will align with a multi-tiered system of support framework, providing common expectations to all members of the community, while also creating more targeted supports to meet the needs of individual students and their particular needs. And so what we mean by that, we're going to look at that universal tier or tier 1, where what are we doing for all of our students? I always like to think of when we're at school, you go through the day and you have, 6 to 8 periods, and you have 6 to 8 bosses. So part of our work in that universal level is how we're creating those common expectations and language for everyone. And one of the ways that we'll be able to do this is through our common lessons that we will provide to our students. And again, that will be a way to have those common expectations established at the beginning of the school year for our students. So tier 2 would be a targeted support and skill building, and this would be considered an intervention. This might include mentoring or support groups, which we've shared a little bit about. For example, the lunch bunch group that I get to work with, where we problem solve and build our skill sets, and our Boys to Men group, for example, where those young people are coming in and being able to get more relationships and supports to help problem solve in their days. This also might be a restorative conference or another intervention that will, again, provide skill building. And then we have tier 3, which would be that individualized and more intense support to repair harm. So this could be how we're dealing with students in the discipline process, and it can also be a part of their reintegration as they're returning back into school. So LT will develop and implement a restorative justice intervention program that maintains students' attendance on campus while participating in educational opportunities that offer a continuum of instructional and positive behavioral supports. And I think, again, the important part here is that we're teaching our students and not just simply removing them without providing them the skills they need for success. The building leadership and student support teams will develop restorative strategies and resources based on findings of the data analysis and will target the specific needs of the district in the areas of prevention, intervention, and reintegration throughout the 22-23 school year. Our AP team and other district leaders will receive further training on restorative practices, and learning opportunities will also be provided to our staff in the future. Just last week, staff were invited to attend our Restorative Justice 101 training as a part of our planning period PD sessions, and this session will be offered again as a part of our professional development opportunities. And so at this time, I'd like to pass it back over to Ms. Owens.
Mike's not on. Just to reiterate what Dr. Tyrell said, this plan, obviously, we're here to present the information, but has been a multidisciplinary effort already with a lot of support from our assistant principals, our associate principals, and those of us here. So that work will continue, and I think you mentioned we'll expand to include other members of our team who will take different parts of this to make sure that we're able to meet our students' needs. We can answer any questions that you may have at this time. This discipline improvement plan has to be approved by the board and submitted by June 1st, so it'll be placed on next week's agenda for approval, but we can answer any questions that you may have.
So when we look at the year 2020, and we have students of color, and on average is about 65 that have been suspended, what is the racial breakout for students of color?
Meaning even broken down more into
By
different.
ethnicity.
So that is data that we need to pull apart and disaggregate. I know that our assistant principals have been working to pull that specific data, but that is what we want to disaggregate and get really specific about who exactly we are talking about when we say students of color.
Right, but I think we would have to kind of already know that, like ahead of time, like already.
We monitor that, so we didn't include it in the general information, but that will be data that we're putting in, or going through with our team to pull apart and make sure that we, as the team that will be implementing the improvement plan, will have all of that information.
And so is that the same case with trying to identify or know, because I assume you know what kinds of incidents that those suspensions have been involved? But it'd be interesting to know how that is broken out by ethnicity, and then also to understand too, with white students, how they are being suspended and for what kinds of incidents as well.
Absolutely. So we can break that down based on infraction, the exclusionary discipline that's applied, demographic information, I mean, even specific to time of day, place in the building, all of that information to really figure out where we're seeing issues or difficulties. And I don't know, Dr. Tyrell, if you have any additional information based on your work with the APs.
I would just say that we suspend, by and large, the data speaks to a story of suspension for fighting, safety concerns, and then substance issues as well. And that looks similar for students of color as it does for our general student population. So our top 3 reasons why we suspend looks the same for the full population than it does for our students of color, but we can certainly break that down even more.
I have a couple of questions. And I will say, like, I don't know this, you know, like, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but have you submitted a plan previously? Because it looks like you're saying after 3 years you have to submit a plan, right? Is this the first plan you've submitted?
Yes.
Improvement plan? It's the first?
Yes, this is the first.
And why is it, if it's after 3 years?
Because this was not presented in 2018.
Okay.
What do you mean by presented?
Like this was not presented to the Board of Education in 2018 at the end of that first 3-year cycle.
Oh, but it was presented to the state?
No, it was not. It was
not required?
It was not board approved in 2018.
So what does that mean? Like, if it's not board, I'm sorry.
So in 2018, when we were on the list for the 3rd time, it was not presented to the board for board approval. So we did not do it.
So is there like a violation that comes if you don't do it? Like, what's the ramifications
There wasn't anyone.
that
but-
account for it? Okay.
Right, there wasn't one, but
We
it wa-
should
but it
have.
was, yes, yes.
Okay, that's, okay.
Yeah.
So, but we're doing
Yeah,
it now.
So we were notified again in this year that it had to be approved, the plan had to be approved by June 1st, board approved and submitted by June 1st, so
So we're complying.
we're complying, yes.
Okay. And then, this is just not my strong suit with numbers. I'm like, wanted to ask Julie some questions sitting next to me here, but she's always got it. But, okay, so when you're looking at the ranks, like 25 out of 381, 25 being, we're like, one of the, like, it starts at 1 being the worst.
Yep.
25.
So you could be ranked anywhere 1 through 381.
Okay, so 25's like on the bad. It's not.
We're
if you were at
within the top
380, it would've been
20%,
better.
yes.
Okay, that's
Yep.
what I want, okay. And then, this is, okay, so when you're looking at on page 69, where you say the percentage of total suspensions, expulsions, appeal, apply to students of color for the years 2016 through 2020 was 63.2. Where are you getting that from the graph?
I
That's just
am
something you came up
calculating
with.
that.
It's, we're not seeing that information.
No, I just put it in a sentence rather than in a table.
Okay.
But basically just calculating that out based on the numbers that are provided by the state. The number of suspensions, our total enrollment. So that's not on this chart, but in the, one of the charts that you can pull up on the website is all the information, and the first column includes total enrollment, then total enrollment of students of
Calculated
colors.
off of that.
So I
Okay.
calculated off
So
of
it
that.
wasn't like you were like making something wonky, making this all come together.
I hope I didn't. I think it's
No,
all
no, I
accurate.
was missing it. I was like, how is that she getting that number? That was
No,
what
I
was
just
wondering.
took it from the massive chart, but the charts are so many columns long and so
You just
big.
compiled it.
Yes, I was trying to distill it
Julie's
down.
pointing things out.
No, I'm ready now. So it's the sum, the denominator is the, like, you had asked about the 63%.
Right, like how you- yeah.
It's the students of color suspensions of 67 divided by the sum of by the total suspensions, which is
Got it.
106.
So it's just not on the chart. Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So, where, and who, and the multidisciplinary committee, who's on that?
That's listed on page 67. Sorry, that's like the intro to the discipline improvement plan. You'll see the plan team listed.
That's the multidisciplinary committee.
In terms of getting this documentation together, yes, but we have, we believe that team will expand because there'll be different arms of how we want to do the handbook review, the revisions to all of the.
You don't have those members yet?
Not yet.
Okay, okay, okay. And then, so how do you test students under the influence? Like, are you just making that assumption that they're under the influence at school? Are you actually like testing them, or how does that happen?
If a student is suspected to be under the influence, our nurses do an assessment and work with our APs through that process.
So I guess my thing, what if they're wrong? Like, are they drawing blood? Like, how are they doing a breathalyzer?
I don't want to step too far outside of my,
I'm just curious.
my expertise. They look at vital signs, and they obviously are well-trained as certified school nurses to be able to notice and pick up signs of substance use. So they will pull the student into the office. Obviously, it's confidential. They will check vital signs and other markers for something being off, and then parents are pulled in, phone calls, things like that. And if a student is obviously displaying other symptoms or signs, they would be sent out.
Because I guess I would just worry that, like, what if it was something else? Because there's a lot of assumptions that
That's
might be
part-
made, and that's my.
Sure, and many times in the initial conversations with assistant principals, students will disclose that they took some form of substance, and then that opens a door for it. That happens pretty regularly. There, Jill, could be times where it doesn't happen, and we have to pursue that assessment with health services without having that information directly from the kid.
I just didn't, you're not like doing like blood draws.
No. And even if a student were to disclose that they had taken a substance, the nurses would typically, almost, I think always, be involved, again, to monitor the health of the student and to make sure that further intervention wasn't needed medically.
Okay. And then, okay, under the data review and analysis, I'm sorry, I have so many questions, I'm really sorry. What is decision A?
That's our, someone else will be able to describe this much more succinctly than I will.
Really, I've gone through you all.
It's-
I don't know.
Sure.
Thank you.
Decision Ed is our data warehouse, so everything that gets uploaded to the state goes through Decision Ed, everything that we're collecting goes through Decision Ed, and we can then pull reports. So it's essentially our where we'll develop dashboards from and whatnot. So it's a way for us to access all the data that exists in the school.
Okay. And one last question. So when you're saying the year, like 2016, is that the calendar year, or is that the school year starting like in the fall for 2016?
That's a good question. I will have to double check. Because they talk about school year, like the goals for the state are based on the end of school year 21, 22, but I'm not sure if they're doing like the July 1 year.
It would be, so like that 2016 refers to the 2015, 2016 school year.
Okay.
So that's like the
It's
very.
where you're ending in.
It's where you're ending. So like the very last row
Got it, okay.
refers to the 2021 school year, which was a year ago.
Got it, okay. I want to make, okay.
I didn't see that, yeah, defined on the website actually, and with the discipline, so that's helpful to know.
It's the spring, okay,
Yeah.
for the, where you're ending the year.
It's the ending, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I have anything more. Thanks.
I appreciate too that you brought all this, like, to the board now, like, we're supposed to have seen this a while back, so thank you for doing that first
It's a
of all.
lot of work, yeah, I mean.
And also then, did ISB then indicate the next steps after something like this is submitted? Like, what then happens?
Then you have to follow through with your plan with the goal that you get removed from that top 20%, that you continue to reduce your.
So they'll evaluate us then?
So if we hit, like I said, they first look to see if a district is eligible for the metric. So as is on here, we were not eligible last year for the racial disproportionality or the expulsion or suspension metrics, meaning we weren't even close to the top 20%. We didn't hit the eligibility, so they will continue. The same data will be reported every year because that's how they're monitoring and holding accountable the school districts in order to make that overarching goal. So the data will be reported to us and to the public, and then we will know whether or not we find ourselves within that range.
And right, because, last year we were in a hybrid remote year, so that probably had a lot to do with it.
I'm certain that it impacted for sure.
I was surprised to read all this, I guess, and I'm learning quickly here. The timing seems tight or brief, and we have a few weeks to get board approval on this. I think, and make sure I'm understanding, we are not an outlier or in whatever, the underperforming category for absolute number of suspensions, absolute, or relative to our population, or expulsions. But what's the problem is that the racial disproportionality, meaning more students of color are being suspended, not I don't know what the other one, suspended, we're just on suspension.
The disproportionality, sorry to interrupt, the disproportionality is a combination of both suspensions and expulsions.
Oh,
for
okay,
students of color.
okay, so it is, okay. And when we see total suspensions of white students, if I'm a white student who's been suspended 4 times, do I show up 4 times or 1 time in the numbers?
It's total number of suspension
Each
incidents.
incident would be 1. Yep.
So I could be, one student could represent 4
Right,
or
78
12.
suspensions could be 60 students.
Okay, so that's interesting. That's interesting with the data, right? Because then the number of students is fixed at, you only get 1 in the denominator.
Right,
Okay.
and that would be, again, as we look to really drill into all this data, that would be something we'd be pulling out. How many students represent the number of suspensions? Is it 50 students representing 78 suspensions? Is it 78 students representing? How does that all bear out? Because that will inform our intervention process.
Okay, and I'd love to, I'm going to ask but not ask for an answer. To what do we attribute this problem, this racial disproportionality? I don't necessarily, that's coming top of mind to me. And maybe we need more data analysis and more kind of reflection to sort that out. But I guess, Jen, you mentioned, or Dr. Tyrell, fighting, safety, and substance abuse were the common. And could we at least for next Monday understand a little bit more about that breakdown? Because I'm learning about Rosecrans, I'm hearing about substance abuse, that was a lot of the examples. But if that's like 1% of this, then I don't know if that the board, I'm sure it's not just 1%. But if it's much more fighting and safety, then I don't know how the board gets around, just to better kind of tie together the response to the situations and to better, I don't mean better, but more clearly, at least for my brain, link the responses to how it's going to progress.
Yeah, we could definitely pull together some summary data there.
And I just wanted to go back to, that's the big piece about the restorative practices part and the focus on relationships and belonging in our school. So again, I appreciate the question that you're asking about in terms of substance abuse, but then the disciplinary with violations with fighting and things of that nature, that's where we need to support and also build that capacity of our educators and making sure that we're there and seeing things before they escalate. So that's a lot of our work, and we've been focusing on a lot of that this year.
Okay, great, thank you.
Before this, needing to do this report, because we understood that that's the work that we needed to do for all of our kids to feel like they belong and that we could help them through difficult times.
And Dr. Rowe, would you say that when you're saying with looking at belonging, that would be like the restorative practices, correct?
Yes, that's a part of it.
Okay.
So again, for our students to feel like they're connected to the educators in the building, and that if they are escalated and needing to problem solve, if they're having a difficult time, because fighting is just the outpouring, of some struggles. And so we need to be there to help support our students, and that's the work that we need to continue to do at this time.
You all took a lot of questions that were running through my head, particularly, Julie, some of the ones that you just asked. I do think it would be helpful to have kind of a breakdown of the different level of infractions. I'm looking at safety concerns, for instance, and there's got to be a continuum of what those offenses look like, whereas I think they're probably on that continuum. There's probably some level that could be readdressed in a different manner with restorative practices, but perhaps there's some offenses on that continuum where to not suspend could be a danger to our student population and so forth. So, my mind is going through questions about those aspects and how we would handle the offenses on that continuum, because I certainly appreciate and understand why exclusionary discipline practices don't work in a lot of cases, but yet, unfortunately, we have situations all over the country where we can see that, you would potentially want students to be out of the school for a certain period of time to ensure the safety of the broader school community. Then if this graph on page 69, combination of suspensions and expulsions, is there a way that we can understand that better in terms of what are suspensions and expulsions? It sounds like the state is just lumping them together.
They combine it together for the definition, for the calculation, but specific to LT, we have not had, we didn't meet the metric, so you can glean some information from that. We have not met the metric for the expulsion data, the metric being 10 or more expulsions in a given school year. So we can get more specific information. I don't believe there have been expulsions, but certainly less than 10, because we aren't eligible for the metric until we would reach that point.
Okay, and that's great, but I kind of understood these first two sections on page 68 through Julie's question as being not necessarily students of color, but the total expulsion rate and the total suspension rate. So in this area, where they're combined, it would be great to see that broken out. And then the last question / comment that I have is, clearly this is a plan that's being submitted to the state to help us reduce the disproportionality of suspensions and expulsions in students of color. But is this plan, or much of this plan that you just went through, being implemented more broadly to all of our LTHS student population next year?
Absolutely. Any of the supports that we've just talked about are available, and we'd be designing those for all students, any student who's struggling. And even prior to getting to a restorative practice or those processes, Dr. Waterman talked about increasing our district capacity, because we know that even prior to that, even before something happens or there's an escalation, many of the disciplinary things that happen are, prior to that, we need support for students. We need skill building for students through more of a student services, social work, counseling, good adult student relationships in the building from that perspective. So that's our focus for all of our students. We're not only looking at certain groups. We want to make sure that all of our students have that feeling of support and belonging here. Certainly then when we are noting or working with students and we know they need more, that's where that multi-tiered system of support comes into place, where everyone gets a certain level of that support, and then we start adding that in layers for students who would need more, but that's for every student, absolutely.
So this is definitely a system-wide change.
For sure.
A new initiative, system-wide, okay. The last thing, Decision Ed, it's not something new, we've used it before. It's what we report everything to. Are we just accessing a different level of reporting mechanisms or a different?
They have added much greater functionality to the dashboard and reporting functions. So it was very, I'll use really non-tech words, of very clunky and hard to access and hard to get what you needed. And so now they've been able to work with us to create dashboards that give us up-to-the-minute information that we can access at different levels. So what our building team administrators need versus the district-level administrators versus what a teacher may need to look at would be very different, and we can customize all of that so you can look. You can also pull reports to get that longer term data, but we have that ability to see real-time information, which is really crucial for the work we need to do in intervening with students and supporting students. So they went through a massive upgrade to that, and were able to show us all that functionality at the beginning of this year, and there's been a small group of us that have been working with Decision Ed to customize all of that information and work with teams, including one of our assistant principals, who's been instrumental in helping our student support teams understand and use those dashboards.
That's great.
And that district team then is building capacity with our building level administrators as well, so that we can start using, and we've seen a lot of use already this year, but just expand our use of that really valuable tool, and toward progress monitoring, right? We don't want to wait till it's the end of a semester or the end of a year to look at really important metrics. We want to be monitoring along the way, thinking about additional supports, response to where students are at, and that tool is really vital, and we're starting to build some significant capacity among our leadership team.
That's great. That sounds really powerful and very important, so that's great.
To Leslie's point, too, on the clunkiness of it, we actually seriously considered transitioning to a different system last year, and Decision had made some updates and that we were really happy with, so.
Yeah, we were able to vet what their product was going to look like and compare it, and because all the data was already there within our system, it was nice that they had made the upgrades, because we were able to start hitting the ground and using it right away, as opposed to having to flip everything. But it's been a game changer, honestly, in terms of being able to utilize data.
Oh, that's great, because that's the whole purpose of collecting that
Right.
data, right? Is to be able to get the
You
type
can
of
use it.
information that you're describing. So, that's
Absolutely.
excellent.
So I'm just wanting to make sure that we're clear, and I'm understanding that there was a little bit more depth of information, but for the purposes of the state, we didn't need to supply that in this particular draft.
They give you autonomy as a district to look at the data in the way that you feel like is going to be important to your metrics. So we can certainly provide more information
Right,
to the
we'd
board.
like to probably look deeper into what those look like. But then also for the purposes of Monday night, you do need us to move forward with approving the plan that's presented so that we can make that deadline. Okay, just wanted to be clear.
Just before we move on, I just wanted to go back to one thing you shared, just just because we use the word initiative, and really when we're speaking about a lot of this it's more of a philosophy just for people and a mindset and the way that we view our work. So I think a lot of this is our change in our belief system, our philosophy versus another initiative. I just wanted to clarify that.
No, that's a good clarification, and I guess really what I meant by that was, we're looking at this as particularly related to a state mandate, but what I've heard described is a systemic change and not initiative, but I know what you mean.
Yes, the report really speaks to this one state report and discipline improvement plan that needs to be submitted. The bigger picture things we're talking about are more of that change in philosophy and updating our practices to better meet the needs of our students.
Great, thank you. All righty. All right, we have one last item. Thanks, Leslie, and Dr. Rowe, and Dr. Tyrell, and Dr. Waterman for weighing in. We have one last item for the evening then to discuss. It's the 2022-23 Committee of the Whole and regular action meeting dates for next year. Very exciting.
Yeah, so thank you, President Dillon. So in your packet on pages 72 and 73, we're proposing the following dates for Committee of the Whole meetings and regular action meetings, which coincide with the second Monday of each month for the Committee of the Whole meetings and the third Monday of each month for the regular action meetings, except for months where the Monday falls on a holiday, in which case we've moved it to a Tuesday. So this is, the recommendation is that next week we approve the attached Board of Education Committee of the Whole and regular action meeting dates for next school year.
clear your calendars. All right. Thank you.
We had talked early on about just checking, and I assume you have in that you've presented this similar looking format, but checking in with the teams and the folks presenting material and whether 1 week apart allows for enough time. Was there any consideration to spacing the meetings 2 weeks apart? To try to achieve some of that we were concerned might be too time pressured?
Not really. I mean, we've been pretty comfortable with the back-to-back this year, but, so, that's kind of where we're at with
Okay,
wanting to go
good. No, I
back-to-back,
knew
but
early on, we weren't sure if it would.
but certainly if the board is
Figured it out.
interested
It was
in.
new. Yeah, this year, it was a new thing, you're right.
And we have the latitude to discuss this. I know, we're going to have a board self-evaluation meeting with IASB.
Yep.
We have the
Absolutely.
latitude to discuss this, and according to any of those discussions, if we find that, we're in agreement of a different
Change.
schedule, then we can come back and change it.
And we have that scheduled for June 15th, so that's something that we can discuss at that
Okay.
point.
Yeah. Are we, just curious, are we obligated to get this approved by a certain date?
We usually have done it in May typically.
But the state doesn't require us to?
My guess is before you go into the calendar, you have to have the dates on the calendar, but I can check, but we've always
No,
just
you
done
don't
it in
have
May.
to. I was just curious if it was, if it was one of those state obligated date things.
To be clear, I don't know.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
We've approved them in May every year before this, so
Yep.
we wanted to bring it back to the board in May this year.
Okay.
There's like the logistical piece of it, like reserving the spaces. Our feeder schools have already finalized,
Sure.
a lot of their board meeting calendars and have shared with us. And so it's more of a logistical piece. Our live stream service has already requested the dates because we have conflicts then potentially with other school districts that use the same service. So it's a lot more about, as well, the logistical timeframe that we need to be able to approve them.
Got it, that makes sense. Yeah.
We've also in previous years had to modify these throughout the year.
Yeah.
That's just
yeah.
a
Well,
reality.
and that's kind of what I'm wondering, but I can appreciate how complex it must be.
I do love that we moved away from the old board, right, of splitting the committee work across 7 a.m. meetings 3 days a week, which I think I appreciate this format in terms of allowing for public comment and more participation, and then just a nicer flow. We're here for 2 solid nights a month, and otherwise it would be these early, I don't know, maybe I'm just not a morning person, but I like the shift that we made. I don't know if we're having more discussion on the calendar, or if I'm just going off on a tangent here. I like it.
I think everyone else is in agreement. Seems pretty good. Okay, great. Great, thank you, everybody. At this time, we'll begin the non-agenda related portion of our public comments. Marilyn, do we have any non-agenda related comments?
We have one.
Okay. Then just as a reminder, the Board of Education welcomes and encourages public comments during Board of Education meetings. There are 2 opportunities for the audience members to address the board as outlined in the agenda at the beginning and the end of the meeting. Board rules limit individual comments to 3 minutes. While the board appreciates your participation, please understand that the board does not engage in dialogue during public comment. We take all matters seriously, and if there's a specific question or comment that requires follow-up, the appropriate board or administration contact will respond at a later time. While the board encourages constructive participation, attendees are expected to conduct themselves with respect and civility toward all in attendance and adhere to Board Policy 830. This includes not using vulgar, obscene, vitriolic, or defamatory language. Also prohibited is any conduct which berates, threatens, or intimidates a board member, staff member, student, or any other person in attendance, or which impedes, delays, disrupts, or interferes with the meeting. Any person who does not adhere to these rules and expectations will have their time for addressing the board cut off and may be subject to removal from the meeting. Marilyn, can you please call our first speaker? Or
Mary O'Dowd.
Do I need to sign in somewhere?
Did you want to go ahead, hon? Oh, no, you go first. I'm like, I don't even know where the paper was. I'm a non-district citizen.
Oh, I appreciate it. I'm not Mary O'Dowd. My name is Camille Alvarez.
Okay, well, we'd have to, if you didn't sign up and you didn't sign up before the meeting, the rules are that you'd have to come to next month's meeting. Thank you. Okay. Mary O'Dowd, then?
I'm an army of one. Good evening. Mary O'Dowd, LT class of 1980, current resident of Darien. Thank you all for your time and service, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I wish to comment
on the April 27 incident at South Campus. I understand that I'm here to address the board, but if it's okay, I'd like to say some things to someone who may not be here with us tonight in the hope that they might be tuning in. I promise to be respectful. To the young woman who was brutally assaulted, I cannot possibly imagine what you are going through. But please know that I care about you and will continue to keep you and your family in my prayers. Please know that you are loved, you are valued, you are beautiful, you are talented, you will get through this, you will heal, you will do great things. And please know that you are not alone. May God bless you and your family now and always. Thank you.
This concludes our non-agenda related public comments tonight. At this time, the board will adjourn into closed session for reasons listed on our agenda. The board will not be taking action following tonight's closed session portion. Is there a motion then to adjourn into closed session?
So moved.
Second.
Second. Marilyn, will you please call the roll?
Member Bear? Yes. Member V. Daniels?
Yes.
Member Kelly?
Yes.
Member Swinehart?
Yes.
Member Thomas?
Yes.
Member Dillon?
Yes. Thank you, everyone.